For the past 10 years, the MMORPG Abyss has held the top spot in the rankings among virtual reality games by Peak Online. The main character swung his sword in a jump. His blow hit the enemy. He was the best player in the Abyss. The young man confidently hit several more enemies. He smiled confidently. He had won countless competitions over the past 2 years. The blade in the player's hands turned into a light whip. The tip of the whip grabbed the enemy's leg. The warrior covered himself with a shield from the wall of flame in which the enemy was burning. He had received first place in the PvP rating for 3 years in a row. The hero crossed the twin blades and rushed forward. The crossbow pierced the knight's armor. The tip of the spear flew by quickly. The guy pierced the enemy's throat with it. His class was a master of weapons. And in the game he was known as Corn Silk, and in short he was a pro. But after reading the chat, the young man learned that a sequel to Abyss was coming out. It would no longer be possible to log into the old account, and he would have to start all over again. The world of Abyss was coming out soon, and the gamer wondered whether it was worth switching to the new game. But while he was pondering this question, his older brother, the developer of Abyss, contacted him. It was deep at night when the main character's apartment rang, and they wanted to ask him for something. The meeting took place in a cafe. Looking at his brother with displeasure, the young man asked why he had invited him here. The director did not answer right away, searching for something on his tablet. Finally, Jinho showed a picture of a character, in which the younger one immediately recognized the Black Knight. The gamer remembered that this character guarded the Red Queen and played a key role in the plot of the game, a mysterious figure about whom there was practically no information, a cult character who became a symbol of the game, known as the Black Knight. The developer clasped his fingers together and confirmed that it was true and that his brother had probably heard about the event in honor of the release of the Abyss World 1 vs. 100, where players would be able to fight the Black Knight one-on-one. He replied that he had heard, of course. Would they really add him to the list, since he really wanted to participate but he didn't dare ask, otherwise people would condemn the director for using his official position, but he heard the offer to become the Black Knight. Jin Hyuk looked at his brother in surprise and asked if he was serious, since an artificial intelligence should control a non-player character. The man looked away and replied that the entire team developing the AI for the Black Knight had died in an accident. He tried to restore the data from a backup copy but only got the old version. Then he tried to use the best AI they had left, the Red Queen, but nothing worked. The hero covered his face with his hand and noted that even if she was the last boss of the Abyss, she was added 2 years ago. Did he really take Korean gamers for morons? Because the Queen had long since turned into a punching bag, after which he clarified, did they really ask him to become a Black Knight and fight on his behalf? The programmer looked at his brother seriously and replied that this was exactly what he called him, the best player of the Abyss, Corn Silk, a young talent in virtual reality games. A skeptical expression appeared on the player's face when the interlocutor added that, in addition, although they were half-brothers, they were still brothers, so he could trust him with this secret. The young man grinned and repeated the word brothers. The director frowned. The gamer continued to grin and offered to speak frankly. They did not get along so well. To ask for such a favor. But assuming that he would agree, what would he get in return? To which the man said about a lifetime subscription to the Abyss World. The guy got angry and asked if his brother was kidding. He could have bought it with his own money. But in response he heard that this was an official reward. There were 2 more things from him. Frowning, the developer added that this was equipment for connecting to the Abyss World, which allowed him to increase synchronization to 25%. The protagonist's eyes widened. He realized that if synchronization increased, then his feelings in the game would be more realistic. Usually the maximum available was 15%, but he was offered the opportunity to increase it to 25%. The player rubbed his cheek with his fist and admitted that it was quite tempting, and clarified about the second reward. The developer called it time savings. Remembering his brother's character, he explained that I saw the statistics of his account in the Abyss. It took him 9 months to open the secret class of the Warrior Weapon Master. He raised an eyebrow and added that if his taste didn't change, he would help him get it as quickly as he could, so as not to get caught himself. That same night in the protagonist's apartment, falling onto the couch, the guy thought that he really thought 15% wasn't enough. But he couldn't wait to try 25%. Remembering the figure of his game character again, he remembered that they would also help him get his class back faster, since there was no way to transfer equipment or level from one game to another, since they were united only by the name and lore. But that was all. The player smiled. Of course, he was thinking about moving to the sequel, but with his brother's help it should take much less time. Spreading his arms on the back of the couch, he began to think out loud that if he entered as a monster, he would be able to fight other rankers. When else would I get such a chance? And mentally added that he would have fun and get a reward. There was no reason to refuse. He looked at the phone screen and saw several messages. After running his eyes over them, the young man opened his mouth, remembering that today was the idiotic guild meeting. Pursing his lips, he thought that since he was soon going to the Abyss world, it was worth at least saying goodbye. The player put on virtual reality glasses. He spent more than 9 years in the Abyss, but these 3 months were the most fun. A few days later, Jin-hyuk came to the main office of Abyssoft, where he was indignant that he had to act out his role. Shaking the script, he reminded his brother that he had not said a word about it. The director tapped his temple with his finger, and noted that the character had written dialogues, or he wanted to just stand there stupidly. The man urged him to think about it, and added that they had recorded the voice in advance, so he would not have to worry about it. Exhaling tiredly, the player reminded that he was not even an actor. How could he do this? To which the developer confidently replied that this could be fixed right now. The guy looked up at his brother when there was a knock on the door, and asked what he was talking about. The girl who entered the room attracted both of their attention. She apologized for the intrusion, and Jinho was glad that she came just in time, and asked his brother to say hello, introduced Jiyeon, explaining that he would help him improve his acting skills. The girl imitated an earphone with her fingers, introduced herself. She added that she voiced the Red Queen, and expressed hope that they would get along. The gamer looked at his new acquaintance with distrust, and noticed that her voice was not at all like the main boss of the game. To which the actress put her palm to her chest, and gave a quote from the character, "Fall down and bow your head, for I am the only ruler of the Abyss." Then she smiled sweetly and asked how he felt. Did it look like him now? The gamer extended his hand to the girl and admitted that he believed, after which he introduced himself. The director headed out and announced that they would see each other often from now on, advised her to remember her name, and then added that he had a lot of work and it was time to go. The guy turned around abruptly, barely managing to mentally ask in what sense see each other often. Jiyeon smiled and suggested starting to practice. 2 weeks later, the day of the event arrived. A banner with the image of the Black Knight hung in the stadium. The host shouted over the noise of the stadium, announcing that the agonizing wait was coming to an end. There was only 1 day left until the launch of the Abyss World. Sajin, the official model of the Abyss World, turned to her co-host Hajin with a smile and announced that today everyone was waiting for a grand event dedicated to this event, 1 against 100, and the interlocutor confirmed that this event will take place today. Players will be able to fight the Black Knight. The model continued that this event would feature rankers of all stripes, and as everyone had guessed, a total of 100 people. The second host extended his hand and announced that among them was the best of the best, the one who occupied the second line of the ranking. They invited the incredible Han Sung to the stage. The protagonist's mouth dropped open while looking at the phone screen, when the second host said that the player from first place was also invited, but he could not attend due to personal reasons. Sajin was surprised that his partner had really been texting him, and then asked the player what number he was fighting under. Jin-hyuk watched as the second from the ranking spoke from the phone screen, informing that he was the last on the list. At that moment, someone behind him announced that there were 10 minutes left until the trailer was released. The player grinned, and decided that it was time for him to get ready too. He put on his VR glasses, announcing the start. Soon, the Black Knight successfully logged in. Streamer Taeyun was scrolling through the chats, and announced to his viewers that they had been waiting for this for so long, because right now he was in the waiting area of the 1 vs 100 event. Scrolling through the message feed, he asked to wait a little, but judging by the comments, this streamer was not considered the best, but he was sure that he was still lucky, and this was his chance to increase the number of subscribers. Logging in as a character, the player thought that his chances of winning were 0, but he had another goal, to hold out as long as possible. He entered the arena, preparing for the fight, while notifications announced the plot of the event. The gates began to open, and the voice of the Black Knight said that Her Majesty the Queen told him, causing the commentators in the chat to be amazed by the voice. The knight entered the arena, and added that he will follow his will to build their kingdom in this world. He took a step forward, continuing that his answer was that he would always remain her loyal knight, who would gladly obey orders. Pointing a finger at the enemy, the character called humanity pathetic. Clenching his hand into a fist, he demanded that they fall down and bow their heads before him, calling on them to worship him, for he is the ruler of the Abyss. The player jumped back, although the chat laughed at him. Looking at the enemy, the player said that he would hold out as long as he could to analyze the behavior of the Black Knight. The streamer turned and told the chat that he would first check at what distance the enemy begins to aggro. If he takes 10 steps per minute, watch the reaction and decide what to do, but at that time the chat began to warn about the danger. The guy looked forward in confusion, not understanding why they were so angry at him. And at that moment the Black Knight dealt a crushing blow to the chatterbox. The player collapsed on the sand of the arena, not understanding why the hell it happened so quickly, and he was sure that the enemy had a spear before. The knight turned to the audience and said that there were still 99 left. Extending his blade forward, he demanded the next one. The hosts watched what was happening in the game. Looking at the defeat of the first player, they concluded that Ubisoft was well prepared. Sajin looked at the screen with her mouth open and asked if they saw these movements. The Black Knight took out dual blades, and the co-host answered that the movements are normal, and as for the huge aggro radius, he did not even remember if he had ever had such a thing. Hansen shook his head and assumed that it was made like this specifically for the event. Remembering the battle, he noted that the boss did colossal damage. It was impossible to believe that a max-level Holy Knight died so quickly. The player suggested that the character was programmed to attack vital points, and Judge, who was sitting next to him, clarified what he meant, but he didn't have time to answer her. The model jumped up and announced the start of the second battle. The gates were raised, letting out the next player. The guy came out of the gate. They called him Red Bean from the Bean Powder Guild. He was known for his dual sword style and the ability to develop incredible speed. Red opened his mouth and, when the host asked how long this hero would last, muttered that he was being praised too much from the beginning, and decided to first scout the situation. But the knight instantly jumped out in front of him. With one attack, the boss destroyed another enemy, while someone from the hosts noted that he struck the arms and legs. The model noted that it no longer looked like he was aiming only at vital points, which made the Rachner sitting next to her apologize. The second player was defeated and the hosts were impressed. It had only been 30 minutes since the event started. The player characters continued to die one after another. A comment was made that 30 of them had also been eliminated, and if the enemy was so strong, did that mean that no player would last longer than a minute? But what was more surprising was that no one managed to hit the Black Knight. Hazung admitted that although it was hard for him to believe, it seemed like everything was made so that he could not be defeated, and the girl agreed with him. It was impossible no matter how many rankers participated. The guy clenched his fist. He thought that he would not be surprised by the presence of a passive skill like immunity to damage, although until now the boss either blocked or reflected all attacks. Who did Ubisoft create? At this time, Judge disappeared from the table, and the host announced that it was her turn now, and remembered that she was a magic class. The sorceress entered the arena while the co-host was telling that the girl had a hidden magic class of an archmage, which specialized in quickly combining powerful abilities. It was even interesting what the outcome of the fight between the mage and the swordsman would be. Having waved her staff, the girl used flight, and quickly rose into the air. Watching this flight, the hosts commented that they expected the use of standard combat tactics for such an opponent. If the distance was increased, the swordsman would be at a disadvantage, but everything was not so simple. The knight looked at the enemy while the host said that he had high magic resistance. The sorceress raised her staff up, creating a 90% explosion. The blows flew at the boss, while the observer stated that in this case the mage's strength was not important. But the knight stood firm. He rushed forward. He summoned another weapon in his hand. The girl clenched her teeth. Mentally she prayed that it would not be a spear. But a bow appeared in the enemy's hands. The arrows flew at the sorceress, and she summoned a shield and screamed, "How can such a character exist?" Looking anxiously at the enemy, Judge realized that she could not simply defend herself. She was running out of mana, so she decided to first descend and increase the distance. When the archmage landed on the sand, the host immediately realized that she no longer had mana left. But there was nothing to be done. The potion could only be drunk on the ground. Glancing at the boss, the girl began to blink, trying to confuse the enemy. But the next moment, she saw an arrow right in front of her face. Its tip was reflected in her eyes, when it seemed to her that the AI could read minds. The knight found his target. The hosts were shocked. The sorceress collapsed on the arena floor, while the audience could not believe how the boss could foresee where Judge would move. Hansen looked at the screen indignantly and shouted that this was impossible. No matter how good the artificial intelligence was, it could not read minds and predict movements. Clenching his fists, he added that even if it was an event, it was a bit too much, and the model remarked that she thought that balance adjustments would be needed before the launch of the Abyss world. And while they were talking, the 33rd player dropped out. Jinhyuk turned away from another defeated enemy, thinking that this was already the 33rd player. It was time for them to appear. And looking up, he realized that they were indeed here. Several streaks of light flashed across the sky and landed in front of the Black Knight. The light began to fade. A figure appeared inside it. A man stepped forward, who announced that it was too early for the heroes to give up. Preparing for battle, he announced that they would now act together. The girl looked forward with determination, and another guy looked mockingly at the enemy. The audience opened their mouths. These characters seemed familiar to everyone. 3 fighters rushed at the enemy. They turned out to be NPCs from the Abyss, and they shouted that this place would become the tomb of the cursed knight. But the protagonist chuckled unnoticeably. He had been expecting their attack, but now they were on his territory. The Black Knight raised his hand and commanded the evil beast of the abyss to appear and cast his enemies into the abyss of despair. The ground around the warrior's feet began to move. He jerked and shouted that he could not move. Stretching his hand out to his allies, he urged them not to panic because of the strange skill. Fear flashed in the NPC's eyes. He recognized the monster. An ugly creature crawled out of the mud. It was the beast of the abyss named Gurkha. Sajin jumped to her feet. She did not immediately believe that this was what she thought, the legendary monster of the abyss Gurkha. The player sitting next to her turned pale and confirmed her assumption, adding that this monster could be equal in strength to mid-level raid bosses. Many mud monsters attacked the characters, and the guy was terrified that the boss could summon them in such numbers. The knight held a clot of dark energy in his hands, ordering the monsters to tear everyone apart. The model looked at the screen in fear and muttered that it was impossible, because most of the NPC squad had been destroyed. Scrolling through the attack of the first squad in his head, the protagonists remembered that there was a reason why the organizers added old NPCs from the abyss to this event. They interfered with the logic of the news stories, so they planned to cleverly get rid of them with the hands of the Black Knight. Watching what was happening, Jin Hyuk thought that he was smart enough to understand this, and since he got rid of the NPCs, the next test awaited him. The hero had already recognized the next opponent. It was Chunbok from his own guild, and he realized that since this was the place where all the rankers gathered, it was obvious that his guild members had appeared. The girl narrowed her eyes and cocked the trigger. But the next moment she was also defeated. The Grandmaster saw no reason to pity her. The hosts watching this were all wondering what kind of boss this was. Looking anxiously at the virtual arena, Hansen thought that the boss's basic stats were impressive, but what was more incredible was the number of behavior patterns. By the most conservative estimates, he had 300 of them. The young man stood up, and when the model announced that another player had dropped out, he said that it was his time to prepare. The girls clenched their fists, supporting the last player, wishing him luck and to do his best, and he promised to try. The player resolutely headed to the game room, mentally calling for the Black Knight to wait for him. The mercenary king was breathing heavily, just as he thought. The high priestess smiled guiltily and admitted that many brave men had put their lives on the line, but it seemed that they had reached their limit. The dragon knight covered his eyes with his visor and retorted that they still had hope. The fairy queen turned around and announced that he had arrived. The pillar of light brought the last player with it, and the NPCs announced that they no longer had the strength to fight, so they begged to use the last bit of their power. Hansen looked at the characters resolutely and confirmed that he understood them. The characters turned into pure light and merged into a sphere. This sphere ended up in the hands of the last player. He clenched it in his fist. The protagonist looked at the last enemy. It turned out that the one who constantly challenged him was the last one, and it was obvious that he received a powerful buff just for show. The guy remembered his brother's face when he said that he didn't care whether he would fool around with them or not, but he hoped that he would crush the last player into dust. Lowering his head, Jin Hyuk decided that this time he would fight at full strength, and said the character's line out loud, threatening the man that this place would become his grave. The gamer raised his blade. He thought that now it was 3 times stronger than from a regular NPC buff. The knight rushed forward. The opponent's blades crossed. While the boss swung his sword, the player thought that this should be enough for victory. But he barely had time to reflect the enemy's blows. The guy flew to the side, barely staying on his feet. Gritting his teeth, he realized that his opponent was strikingly different from the previous bosses. The player rushed forward. He believed that in front of him was just a programmed monster, and as long as you understand all the patterns, you can win. Hansen turned his blade into a light whip. The knight's eyes flashed. He jumped up. The player's eyes widened. The boss swung his spear. He threw the weapon with all his might. The player barely managed to dodge the blow. He didn't understand how this enemy could change weapons so quickly. The knight rushed towards him. The player began to understand that artificial intelligence couldn't do such a thing. The next moment, the enemy caught up with the guy with twin blades. The boss's palm grabbed the player by the face, and he barely had time to understand what was happening. And the next moment, the enemy slammed the warrior into the arena floor. The spear shaft was sticking out of the fighter's chest, and he cursed mentally. The guy clenched his teeth. He realized that he didn't even leave a scratch on the knight. He remembered the image of the leader of the raiding, and thought that it would be better if the last player was Corn Silk. But his eyes immediately reflected rage. How long could the ranker remain in the leader's shadow? The player stood up, raising his blade, and the knight remarked that it was absurd to continue holding on, knowing that resistance was useless. In this case, he wanted to show the stubborn one something. He looked straight at his opponent and declared that this was the true power of the abyss, the bottomless sun. The boss raised his hand, and a black star appeared in the sky. The sky darkened, and dust began to rise up. The young man looked at this, unable to comprehend what was happening. The knight pointed at the star with his finger. A huge black sphere began to descend onto the arena. The gamer opened his mouth, whispering that this was too much. A bright light began to absorb him, and the warrior clenched his teeth, promising to take revenge on him. Then he disappeared in a bright flash of light. The next day after the 1 vs. 100 event, in the protagonist's apartment, Jin-hyuk was lying on the couch, looking at the phone screen with a satisfied look. Scrolling through the feed, he read how players scolded Hansen, and did not understand that the fight was good, but people reacted quite harshly, although it was none of his business. Remembering what happened, the gamer thanked the equipment that increased synchronization to 25%, although the sensations were not pleasant, but its effectiveness could not be denied. The guy put on virtual reality glasses, thinking that the servers of the World of the Abyss should have opened by now, and decided that it was time to go in. A flash of light hit his eyes. He looked at his hands. The player looked at himself, surprised that his avatar was already completely created, and assumed that this is what his brother was talking about, mentioning the increased synchronization. He folded his arms on his chest, and looked at the status window. His race was a human. The starting location was a village in the northwest of the kingdom of Lodran. The young man smiled. He voiced his nickname Sid. It was not too hackneyed, and decided that it was high time to start. Another flash appeared. The hero found himself in the starting location. Calling up the information window again, he decided to check his basic characteristics. A huge crowd was rushing towards the guy. He looked at the running people in surprise. The players' faces were angry. They demanded to get out of the way. They needed to have time to occupy the training dummy while they were free. Following the running eyes, the player decided that this was some kind of quest, and indeed, it was necessary to follow Captain Bark's instructions and increase his level by hitting the dummies on the training ground. Rubbing his chin with his fingers, the young man thought that the amount of experience received decreases if the number of players attacking the dummies increases, which means it was too late to do this. Turning in the other direction, the gamer came up with the idea that he just needed to get to level 5. He headed towards the gate, deciding to go hunting. The guards looked at the hero and warned that it was dangerous outside. He needed to get at least level 5 before he left here. But the guy passed by, saying that everything was fine. But he himself understood perfectly well why the guards warned newbies about this, because there was a penalty for death. Usually they took away some experience and gold, but in the World of the Abyss, if the player dies not in the event zone or on the battlefield, he will be forcibly logged out, and it will be impossible to log back in for 12 hours. Heading towards the forest, the player mentally added that, given that there could only be one avatar on one account, this was a pretty serious penalty, but he did not need to worry about it. Soon the young man reached the thicket of the forest. Wild dogs of the 3rd level roamed in the forest, and this is what the gamer was looking for. Jin-hyuk looked out from behind a tree, figuring that due to their level, one could die from a simple scratch, but that was if they hit. The protagonist walked up to the dogs, taking his sword out of its sheath, deciding not to let this happen. He took off. Smiling confidently, the guy said he was starting. The blade's blow cut off the dog's head, and the player was glad he remembered all their patterns. Then the young man put down the second one. Piercing another monster with the blade of his sword, he figured that he needed to kill 30 more at this pace. But then one of the dogs made him stop. Black smoke came from the dog, and the gamer saw that he was level 10. The hero opened his mouth. He even thought that this was some kind of game bug. But then he remembered watching an article where they said that the so-called disfigured monsters would be added to the Abyss world, which was an abbreviation for Monster Disfigured by the Abyss, a new type of elite enemy. And they also seemed to say that it would be difficult to determine what kind of monster is in front of you, but not for this guy. The player gripped the sword handle with both hands and decided to try to fight it. He swung the sword at the monster, and the blow hit the target. The young man smiled confidently. He decided that it was not that difficult. But the next moment the dog's paw reached him. The blow of the claws hit his stomach. The gamer was forced to take a step back, and then the game announced that it was imposing a penalty for the difference in levels, reducing all characteristics by 10%. Jin-hyuk grabbed his wand, cursing. Intercepting the sword, the protagonist decided that it was because he was wounded by a unique monster. At this time, the dog jumped right on the warrior. But he managed to repel this attack with his blade, because a wild dog remained a wild dog. But the monster still managed to bite into the guy's hand. His eyes widened when he realized that this was his chance. With all his strength, the player slashed the dog with the blade of the sword on the stomach. The monster fell on its back. A pool of blood began to spread beneath him, and the young man exhaled, realizing that he really was in pain, apparently due to the increased synchronization. Breathing heavily, the gamer noticed that the weapon had little durability left, so he decided to take the dropped items and return to the village. Next to the corpse of a unique monster, he found a new blade with good damage, and he was lucky to find it now. The hero took the new thing, not understanding where the new quest was, and immediately received a task to kill 2 wild dogs disfigured by the abyss, and get an unknown ring. Looking happily at the sword, the guy thought that getting jewelry at such a level was some kind of cheating, and he also got the weapon thanks to old mechanics. Then the player decided that it was time to be greedy. A few hours later, a victorious cry of a young man was heard over the forest. He stretched, declaring that he was done. Throwing the ring, he realized that he had received the 10th level, and the ring looked useful. Looking at the prize, the gamer slightly regretted that he did not have an identification scroll, but decided to deal with it in the next village. Looking up at the sky with a smile, Jin-hyuk remembered that since he had reached level 10, he could now choose a class, and of course it would be a warrior. Remembering his image from the old game, the protagonist announced that he was going to the weapon master. The next day in the training area, the captain folded his arms across his chest and began to explain what it took to become a warrior. The guy received a private message, but no one knew his ID, so he wondered who it could be. At that moment, Bark opened one eye, intending to continue. But noticing that the recruit was distracted, he demanded that he focus. Laughing nervously, the player closed the notification, after which he apologized, and decided to read it after he completed the class quest. The captain pointed to the door behind him and invited him in. There was an instructor waiting to test his skills, to which the young man thanked him. He confidently walked inside, and after him they expressed hope that he would become a great warrior. Inside sat a fair-haired guy in armor. Raising his head, he introduced himself as Kun, and that he would be conducting the exam, and asked the name of the newcomer. The gamer said his nickname. He opened the information window, while the examiner recognized his name as Good, after which he explained that he only needed to fight him and win. The hero looked at the character, and before the examiner had time to announce the start, the guy rushed forward. The man jumped up and asked what was going on. Trying to grab the second training sword, the examiner called the recruit a scoundrel. But the player swung his leg and kicked the weapon far to the side. The examiner followed the sword with his gaze and clenched his teeth. And when he turned, the young man was already preparing to strike, adding that he should not have turned his back on the enemy in the midst of battle. The blow of the wooden blade made the man fall. The examiner coughed. With his hand, the gamer pushed the character onto his back. Then he stepped on his throat with his boot. Raising a frightened look at Jin-hyuk, he called him a coward. The protagonist grinned and noted that what difference did it make if he won the battle. The guy opened his mouth when he received the achievement Sneaky Coward and wanted to know the conditions for receiving it. Scratching his chin with his fingers, the player read that he had to prevent the enemy from using a weapon and defeat him without taking damage, and realized that it was unrealistic to get such an achievement, unless by pure chance, and at this time his characteristics also increased. The young man put his hands on his hips and figured that this was not bad, because his reputation was not particularly important to him. Now his class had to change, and this meant that he would have to leave the village of newbies for now. After some time, the newly made warrior was greeted by an NPC girl, who added that he could use the teleport once for free. Smiling at her, the gamer asked to send him to the Ghent fortress, and the girl promised to prepare everything. Soon the action moved to the Ghent fortress. Jin-hyuk looked around confusedly and noticed that the place was rather deserted, but at that moment someone grabbed his shoulder. The protagonist turned around, and the girl who grabbed his sleeve asked him why he didn't read the messages. She looked straight at him with a smile and said it didn't matter. The main thing was that they finally met. The girl was the first? The guy put his hands on his hips and asked the priestess what she meant, and she replied that she was the first to recognize the guild master. The player's eyes widened. The girl smiled happily and was glad to meet him. A little later, in a small house, the young man looked at the priestess, trying to figure out who the hell she was, and since she called him the guild master, that meant she was from Trashken. Squinting, he realized that since the avatar's gender in the Abyss world had to match the gender in real life, it was possible to guess. Remembering the 3 girls from the guild, the gamer figured that this lady was one of those 3. An image of Chun-bak appeared before his mind's eye, but she usually called him older brother. He remembered Jin's face, but she simply called him the leader, which meant he knew who was in front of him. Putting his chin on his palms, the hero asked if it was Harmonica in front of him. But the priestess raised her finger up and called herself Monica, although lately everyone called her Nika. Having looked more closely, the guy at first thought that it was, but then it dawned on him, and he asked how she managed to recognize him. To which the girl reminded him that she had asked earlier why he had not read the messages. The player immediately went to his mail, realizing that she was right. And then his mouth fell open when he saw that this lady was among his friends. The priestess pressed her finger to her cheek and suggested that it was because she had sent a request, to which the young man remembered that in order to be added as a friend, he had to accept the request, but he had not received or accepted anything. The girl, slightly blushing, asked the gamer to think carefully how many people could have added his pre-created avatar to the friends list. The guy clenched his teeth in fear, she knew that too. Clapping her hands in front of her, the priestess said that yesterday's event was quite fun to watch. The practice of acting really paid off. The player's eyes became even bigger. She also knew about the Black Knight. Wasn't that a trade secret? But looking more closely, the young man recognized Xian in the priestess. Xian waved her hand and smiled. The protagonist frowned and said that he could admit that she somehow found out that he was a Black Knight, but not about corn silk. Maybe his brother told her? The girl extended her finger saying that everything was wrong. Until yesterday's event, she didn't know anything at all. She was wondering if it was really him, and after a while she managed to make sure that it was him. Jin-hyuk scratched his temple and couldn't understand how he was able to give himself away. Smiling, he asked the girl how she did it. The guy imagined Jarsh next to Jian, when she said that she used Blink, and simply AI was able to predict the trajectory of movement and hit the target with an arrow. Jarsh then raised her head in shock, and then it dawned on Jian herself. She realized that only one person is capable of this. Jin-hyuk, looking at the girl, said that he would never have thought that she was voicing the Red Queen. She, leaning on her hand, said that she herself would not have thought that her boss's younger brother was that very player. The girl smiled when the guy asked her why she kept addressing him so respectfully. She answered by saying that it was because she had been calling him that for so long that it was imprinted in her brain. The girl almost jumped up when the protagonist told her that they would never see each other again anyway. Jin-hyuk frowned slightly and said that there was no reason to meet. Ji-yeon was indignant and opened her mouth and said that they could just go out to eat somewhere. The girl looked away and said that they would have a chance to meet anyway. She clasped her fingers and asked the protagonist if he had signed a contract with the CEO that he would enter the game as a monster. The guy rubbed his chin and said that it was true. He remembered how the manager pointed to the screen and showed him a list of bosses that he would be. Sometimes he would have to turn on the actor again. Taking the tablet in his hand, the guy asked what reward he would get for pretending to be them. Jinho smiled and said that he would receive hints on how to obtain the Hidden Weapon Master class and full compensation as long as the game rules were not violated. Jin-hyuk grinned, saying that he agreed. Now pointing to the system panel, the guy said that he needed to go level up. The girl slapped her palm, saying that she just had a group quest. Could they do it together? The protagonist immediately refused her offer. The girl jumped up, saying that she came to this village only to meet him, and the path was not short at all, and he could have pitied her. Frowning, the guy said that no one forced her, and she was here on her own accord. Approaching Jin-hyuk, Jian said that this time she also decided to become a priestess, and this class could be useful to him. The protagonist, after listening, said that she still can't do it. Waving her hand, Ji-yeon asked Jin-hyuk if he was supposed to receive hints about the hidden class for playing as monsters. Extending her hand to the guy, she said that hints about the hidden class should be transmitted through her, and if he contacts the boss, this will be immediately known. The protagonist rubbed his chin and thought. Ji-yeon abruptly handed him a potion, saying that they would make a deal. He would agree to complete a group quest with her, and the reward would be this potion. The guy closed his eyes, asking what kind of potion it was. Taking a closer look, the protagonist realized that it was a high-level experience increase potion. Puffing out her chest, proud Ji-yeon said that her boss gave it to her. Extending a finger, the guy said that they would use it for 1 hour. Ji-yeon objected, saying that she was going to use it once a day. Jin-hyuk lowered his hand, saying that if everything goes like this, he will rise faster during the hunt. Besides, they need to use the potion within 72 hours. The girl clenched her fists and puffed out her cheeks. Sitting down at the table, Jin-hyuk asked the girl what kind of quest it was that she did not complete it, and just waited here. Smiling, Jian said that one more person should come, and it was not a member of the guild. Jin-hyuk frowned and asked for what quest she needed 3 for. Smiling, the guy asked if she took a hidden quest. A moment later, the system panel with the hidden quest appeared in front of him. Shaking the potion in her hand, Jian said that she received the trader's quest along with the potion. She was not interested in the hidden class, so she took the quest, and in the future she will be able to get 2 more. The hidden quest had a high difficulty level, but the reward was appropriate. The items in these quests could only be obtained in them. The protagonist rubbed his hand and thought. He understood that for the hidden quest he would need to use all the received characteristic points. The guy silently stared at the system panel in front of him, mentally saying that the points could be distributed in everything except resistance and reputation. Jin-hyuk smiled when the girl asked him if he wanted to invest in agility. He answered saying that he could not help but rely on speed, because they were better than powerful blows. Jian clenched her fists and smiled and said that she also invested in the characteristics necessary for a priestess, namely strength. The protagonist smiled nervously, saying that this was an old harmony. Jian, hearing him, said that people do not change so easily, and he could already create his own guild. The guy looked away, saying that he could not do this right now. The girl froze in confusion when Jin-hyuk asked her to remember what they did in the abyss, and in his mind he said that once they created a guild, the players who came from the abyss would not leave them alone. Putting her hands on the table, Ji-yeon asked what the other guild members were doing. The protagonist interrupted her saying that he meant Yoonbak. Ji-yeon jumped up, hitting the table. Jin-hyuk jerked back in fear and said that it was during the 1 versus 100 event, and she was the 88th player. Embarrassed, Ji-yeon looked away, saying that her younger brother changed his class and increased his stats. The girl bared her teeth and offered to begin, when the system reported her brother's entry into the game. The events take us to the Ghent fortress. The cat-eared boy greeted and introduced himself. Jin-hyuk immediately realized that Pong was of the cat race, and since they are fast, they have a high ability to evade. Standing next to her brother, Jian said that her brother is usually sociable, but in Graz he becomes shy. Pong looked behind him when Jin-hyuk asked him if he used a crossbow. Archers usually used a bow as their main weapon. Due to the long attack range and ease of use, the crossbow was closer, but this was compensated by accuracy. Pong picked up the crossbow and said that he was not yet used to shooting a bow, so he chose a crossbow from which he can shoot at close range. Raising his hand, the protagonist said that there is an auto-aiming system, and if he uses it, he can increase the accuracy of the attack. The boy replied saying that for personal reasons he decided not to use it. Jian approached Jin-hyuk and said that she had just realized that they were a great team, because they had a melee, a healer, and even a ranged fighter. Smiling widely, the girl said that this was literally a dream team. The protagonist grabbed his head, mentally saying that the archer was a newbie, and the priestess did not heal at all, but fought with a mace. It was the worst combination. The only useful member of the team was him. The events take us to the main office of Abysssoft. Jinho leaned back in his chair. Looking at the chat with Jian, he said that so far everything was going according to plan. He smiled when he learned that the group had already started to complete the quest. The sun illuminated the entire forest. The old man stopped and told the group that they had come to that place. Pointing to the cave ahead, he said that according to reports, the king's traders were secretly meeting on the lower floors. The protagonist grabbed Jian, who had gone in front of him, saying to wait. She turned to him asking what was wrong. The guy answered saying that they needed to do something. Did she have an identification scroll? Calling up the system panel, the girl asked why he needed the scroll. Puffing out her cheeks and frowning, dissatisfied, Jian said that she would only give the potion once every 3 hours. Jin-hyuk frowned and said that such potions and maybe other useful things can already drop in the hunting grounds. Pong, standing next to the girl, said that he also had one potion. Jian, very surprised, turned to her brother. Brother Jian, smiling, told the protagonist that in exchange he must help him complete the quest, but it will not take more than 3 hours. Jin-hyuk, grinning, agreed. When the guy took the bundle in his hand, the girl screamed saying that if so, then she will give the potion to him, and he will make a deal with her. The protagonist, smiling, said that it is too late now. Looking at the 9th curse ring in his hand, he mentally said that this ring gives a critical hit for values /U200B /U200 multiples of 9. His lips stretched into a wide smile. For him this ring was funny now, he just had to figure out how to use it. The group walked down the corridor. Jin-hyuk looked at the girl, said that this place seemed familiar. Looking at her partner, Jian said that this was impossible, because this is a hidden dungeon in the world of the abyss. Stroking his chin, he said that he had definitely seen this place before. It looked like the Night Plague workshop. Night Plague was a dungeon that appeared closer to the second half of the Abyss story. The difficulty level was high because of the snake monsters, but the reward was appropriate. Jian shuddered and opened her mouth in fear, saying that this could not be. Turning her head to the guy, she said that she was ready to bet that these dungeons were different in size. Imagining the map of the dungeon, the guy said that it was, but the design and structure were quite similar. Jian nervously smiled and said that this part of the dungeon could have simply been recycled. The protagonist remembered the halfling monsters and mentally said that it made sense, but they couldn't be sure, and the company always puts a lot of effort into creating hidden dungeons. Looking at Jian, Jin-hyuk asked her if she was lying to him. She raised her hand saying that she had nothing to hide. Pong, who was standing in front, frowned and stopped. Everyone quickly formed their weapons when a ghoul warrior appeared in front of them. Holding a mace in her hand, Jian said that the undead are problematic. Pong glanced at her and said that she was a priest and a member of the Holy Clan. On the contrary, she received a bonus to damage. Holding a sword in front of him, the protagonist said that this is true under normal conditions, but his sister is not quite ordinary. A gloomy Jian glanced at the guy, saying that she was actually the most normal. Jin Hyuk angrily said that then the undead should not be a problem for her. Gritting her teeth, the girl said that it was no fun to beat the undead. Besides, she wanted shreds of flesh to remain on her precious mace. Turning around, she asked if he should throw her a buff. The protagonist rushed forward and said that he did not need it. The guy swung his sword to strike. He needed to check something. The guy dealt 8 blows in a second. A moment later, he dealt a 9th blow, cutting off the opponent's hands. The ring on the guy's hands flashed. Jin Hyuk dealt 8 blows again. He abruptly moved back, then the system informed him about the combo reset. The protagonist frowned. He wanted to check if it would work upon receiving damage. The monster's body began to be enveloped in mana. It was moving into the second phase. The monster opened its mouth and threw its teeth. Jin Hyuk immediately swung his sword to deflect the attack. One of the teeth pierced his leg. The guy gritted his teeth. Half of his health was lost in one attack, and if the monster was closer, he would have died. At that moment, the guy's body was enveloped in mana, and he began to heal. Pong fired a crossbow, saying that he could help too. The arrows bounced off the monster's skin. Jin Hyuk suddenly appeared behind the ghoul, striking with his sword. The ghoul's body began to disintegrate. Soon the body spilled on the ground, then the system reported the death of the monster. The members of the guy's group ran up to him, saying that now it was time for them to share the rewards. The protagonist smiled and said that they would use auto-distribution, and the fate of the rarer ones would be decided after discussion. Pointing to the eye, Jian asked what they would do with it. Taking the eye in his hand, Jin Hyuk said that if this item was with the priestess or Samort, it would be much more effective. Pong stared in amazement at the eye he had received. The protagonist turned his head and said that it was time for them to begin. The group ran along the corridors of the dungeon. They periodically stopped to fight monsters. The protagonist put his hand on Pong's shoulder and said that he had better take a new item. Besides, they had to collect the last item. Jin Hyuk frowned mentally, saying that one of the quests was to search for traces of the traitor, so they had no time to waste. Jian sighed, bowed her head and apologized. Walking forward with her head down, she said that she only did what she did, support with buffs. When she should have been fighting on the front lines, the guy heard her and said that she did the right thing. Smiling, the guy said that he was extremely honest. Seeing Pong carefully examining something, he asked him what he was doing. The boy smiled and said that there was an interesting story written here. Seeing how the boy began to read the leaflet again, Jian said that her brother really liked the storyline of the game. The protagonist frowned slightly, realizing that the boy was a fan of the lore. Smiling, Jian said that there was another reason, but she herself was not sure. The couple nervously looked at Pong, who continued to tell the plot of the game. The guy turned around abruptly. He grabbed Pong by the clothes. A moment later, a pair of arrows hit the guy's body. Jin Hyuk fell on one knee. Pong sat down next to him and asked him about his condition. Jin Hyuk replied that everything was fine. The protagonist sweated slightly mentally, saying that the archers were aiming specifically at him, and as long as Pong had the ghoul eye, he would not be attacked unless it was a boss, of course. Looking at the boy, Jin Hyuk asked him to identify the type of enemy using eagle vision. Pong's eyes immediately opened wide. In the distance, he saw 5 skeleton archers, and one looked like an elite monster. Holding the boy with his knee, the protagonist looked into the distance. As Pong walked away, Jin Hyuk mentally said that they should have sent a tank with a shield ahead. Pong cried, saying that they should have brought a tank with them. Jian bared her teeth, her aura released from her body. A golden barrier around her blocked all the arrows. The protagonist formed a sword and said that since they had a tank, it was time for them to move forward. Meanwhile, Jian swung her mace to strike. A moment later, she struck. One of the archers concentrated mana into his bow. The protagonist smirked. He was not going to let him shoot. As he passed by Jian, she stopped him, saying that they were all her prey. The guy stood behind her, saying that he would hide behind her shield then. She frowned at him, saying that there was already little space here. The guy rudely replied, saying that there was plenty of space. Was the corridor not enough for her? The girl stepped to the side, saying that she would then go back and he would stand here. The archer released an arrow. 2 arrows rushed forward. The protagonist froze in horror, realizing that the undead's attack was homing. Jin Hyuk rushed back, telling Jian to get rid of the leader. The girl jumped into the air, saying that she knew everything herself. Running away from the 2 arrows, the guy mentally said that no matter how much he thought, this dungeon was too strange. He abruptly braked. With one swing of his sword, Jin Hyuk deflected 2 arrows. The ghoul spat with his teeth, which was similar to the flurry of blades of an assassin, a former thief after the 3rd class change, The ice storm of a ghoul mage. This is the ice field of an archer. The homing arrows were reminiscent of an attack of an archer after the third class change. Reflecting the attack, the protagonist said that the difficulty was too high. Even if it was a hidden dungeon, no one dared to protect it except for the ranker team. The guy had a feeling that Jinho was testing him standing in front of him. Rushing forward, Jin Hyuk said that the monsters imitating the skills of players, and the fact that Jian did not fight, citing the undead, although she usually goes crazy about battles, everything was strange here. Frowning, the guy said that if the girl knew about the arrows, then everything fits. Reflecting another attack, the guy said that most likely they want to teach the AI of the Black Knight using his fighting style. The guy frowned even more and said that it was disgusting. He rushed towards Jian ahead. The girl was horrified and screamed, asking the guy why he ran towards her. The protagonist continued to run and said that he simply felt disgusted. He abruptly ducked. Arrows rushed towards the monster. A moment later, there was an explosion and the system reported the destruction of the skeleton archer. The smoke in the dungeon gradually dissipated. Jin Hyuk straightened up and told the girl to tell his brother something. He frowned at her and said that if Jinho wanted to cooperate, he should ask properly and not use such methods. The guy narrowed his eyes and told Jian to stop acting like a fool, otherwise she would say goodbye to him forever. The girl turned to the guy and barely holding back her tears said that she was only following the orders of her superiors, or rather the director. Pointing at her with his hand, the guy said that he would not tolerate such lies anymore, to repeat such a thing again, and everyone would go their own way. The guy raised his hand and said that he didn't care what she got after lying to him, but she had to give him everything. She tried to object, saying that she could give him half. The protagonist frowned again. Jian puffed out her cheek and said that so be it, she would give him everything. Then she handed him all the things. The protagonist crossed his arms over his chest and said that in that case, she shouldn't say anything to his brother. If he was going to analyze his actions, then such situations would happen again. After thinking, he said that if there is a golden goose that lays golden eggs, they shouldn't gut it before its time. Baring his teeth and laughing, he said that they should feed the goose to death so that it produces eggs every day. The guy abruptly stopped laughing when Jian said that in that case, they would split everything equally. Waving her hand, she said that if she stuck to this plan, she would be running errands for him, so she should get paid too. The guy narrowed his eyes and said that in that case he would take 80%. Jin Hyuk smiled and said that they had finally collected all the items and could now finish the quest. The group stood in front of a huge gate. The protagonist slowly opened it. Inside, he saw two monsters talking. As he entered, the guy mentally said that this seemed to be a plot point, and he usually skipped such moments. However, because of Pong, whose eyes were shining, he decided not to do so. The man in the cloak said that he had told him about the increased chances, but had not said anything about success. The knight drew his eyebrows together and screamed angrily. The man standing in front of the giant said that the experiment had not been in vain and that thanks to them he had received enough information. Turning to the group, he said that now they had no time to sort things out, because they had guests. Raising a candle, the mage told the knight not to forget that the commander had high hopes for him. Pong clenched his fists, saying that Harridan was even mentioned here. The protagonist glanced at the boy. He himself seemed to be supposed to log in as Harridan and appeared during the event. Deciding to learn more about Harridan, the boy smiled and asked Pong who this commander was. The boy, imagining an archer, said that Harridan was the left hand of the Black Knight. He was even mentioned during the raid of the Red Queen. Looking at Jian, the boy asked if this was true. She, surprised, asked why he decided to ask her. Squinting, the boy mentally began to curse. Jian was the Red Queen and she should have known everything. Looking at the protagonist, she said that she did not know her character very well. Jin Hyuk put his hand behind his back, having received a system notification about the start of the battle. He took a stimulant potion in his hand. Jin Hyuk began to drink the stimulant. After that, he threw the flask away, saying that it was time for them to fight. The flask shattered into pieces. Fildianic, holding a halberd in his hand, began to approach the group. He swung his weapon, saying that he would chop them into pieces. Jin Hyuk jumped back. He did not expect that Fildianic would be the boss of the dungeon. This monster that had a human appearance also had too many varieties of attacks. The protagonist took a stance, assuming that his brother wanted to copy his fighting style in one fight since Fildianic was here. Jin Hyuk grinned. Frowning, he said that it would not be that easy. He changed his stance. The guy narrowed his eyes. He was going to defeat the monster using a single stance. Fildianic swung for a strike. The protagonist jumped back in time, dodging the strike. Jin Hyuk started to strike at high speed. The boss covered his face with his hand, blocking the attacks. Jian with a mace in her hand appeared behind the boss. She struck his body. The girl swung her mace. Stopping, she said that she would not be able to do this more than twice. The protagonist lunged, saying that he knew it. Veins appeared on the boss's face. He was angry. Jin-hyuk froze in horror. The skin on Fildenik's face subsided. The monster entered its second phase in a second, becoming a skeleton. Swinging his halberd, he said that he would not let them stay alive after they saw this form. The blade was at the guy's head in an instant. The protagonist and Jian barely managed to jump aside. The walls of the dungeon shook. Pan stood to the side watching the fight, saying that such synchronization of movements was impossible. The skeleton's elbow rushed towards the girl's face. With one blow, Fildenik threw her into the wall. The girl remained on her feet, although she crashed into the wall. The protagonist took advantage of the chance to jump up. The skeleton's head turned around. Jin-hyuk managed to strike the monster's body. The monster bowed its head. Jian, coming out of the wall, screamed saying that Filding had gone into berserk mode. The aura around Filding changed, the berserk state lasted for 5 minutes, and the only thing left for the pair was to defeat the enemy with a crushing attack, or run. The protagonist jumped on the monster, not paying attention to the fact that Jian suggested retreating. The guy's sword rushed forward. The skeleton raised its halberd. Jin-hyuk blocked the monster's attack. Suddenly, Filding's hand was thrown back by the force of the guy's blow. The protagonist brought the sword behind his back to strike. In a second, he pierced the skeleton's head along with himself. He grabbed the hole in his head, saying that this was impossible. Dissolving, he said that he had to start a new era of humanity, which would inherit the power. In place of the monster, a bow appeared. Smiling, the protagonist said that this item is quite rare, but it is not clear why they need a bow. The couple turned to Pong. He waved his hands, saying that he did not do anything during the battle and he is more comfortable with a short bow than a long one. The guy and the girl looked at each other, Jian thought, and said that she also does not need a bow, because she only uses the weapon that suits her. Picking up the Fildenik bow, the protagonist said that in this case he will take it for himself. He stepped aside and pulled the bowstring. Pong then asked him if everything will be okay. The guy looked at him and asked what he was talking about. Pong worriedly asked if you do not need to have high dexterity to use this rare item. The protagonist answered by saying that he has already put all the points into dexterity. The boy clenched his fists, saying that he was not using meta pumping. Jin-hyuk immediately responded by saying that there was no such thing as meta in this game. Lowering his bow, he said that this was just nonsense that people said due to their limitations. Role-playing games are, first of all, freedom and learning new possibilities. The boy's eyes sparkled with admiration. Smiling, Jian said that even a priest can invest a few points in strength. The protagonist looked at her and told her not to exaggerate his words. Jian poked at the system screen, wanting to change the group leader. Now the protagonist became the group leader. Frowning, the guy asked her why she did that. He narrowed his eyes and cried out, realizing something. The guy raised his head looking at the world message. When a hidden dungeon was cleared for the first time or a hidden quest was completed, a world message was sent indicating the nickname of the group leader. Now the guy was in a bad position. Looking at the girl, he asked her what she was thinking. She answered by saying that she simply gave him glory for clearing the dungeon. The protagonist angrily shouted, saying that he should not have drawn attention to himself. Putting her hand to her chest, Jian said that no one would think that he was the master of the Treshkin Guild. Jin-hyuk frowned and asked her how she could be so sure. The girl answered by saying that he just needed to trust her, and Nugo is not such a rare name. A moment later the system informed the guy about unlocking a new achievement. The guy stared at the system screen, while the girl said that thanks to her, he even got a new achievement. The events take us to the forest. The streamer stared in surprise at the world message. People in his chat immediately began to guess who it was. Most of all they suspected Corn Silk. The streamer himself frowned, realizing that Corn Silk would hardly have chosen such a nickname. The events take us to Erez, a port city. The elf looked at her partner and asked how someone could find a hidden dungeon so quickly. Kitsune smiled and told her friend that she had no idea. Looking at Chungbok to the side, they asked her opinion. Seeing how the girl did not move and did not answer, they assumed that she had logged out. Chungbok turned to her friends and said that she was just thinking about something. The events take us back to the forest. An orc was walking through the forest with a grin on his face. He saw a shadow of a figure jump out of the bushes. The protagonist pulled the bowstring in his hand. The orc growled and rushed to attack. With one shot, the guy destroyed the monster's head. Looking at the bow in his hand, he said that it suited him perfectly. After that, he called up the status window and said that he still had 3 levels left to change his class to a weapon master. Looking at the system panels, the guy thought about it. The system informed him about a crack in the chest that he received for completing a hidden quest. Rubbing his chin, Jin-hyuk thought about what he would get. The guy's eyes and mouth opened wide when he saw the time when the event would be held. Frowning, he said that it was of course sad, but since he promised, he would have to go. The events take us to the main office of Abysssoft. Jian raised her hand greeting the protagonist as in the game. The guy immediately asked her if she would really call him that in reality. She answered by saying that she was just used to it. Jinho, who was standing to the side, said that since he came here, he should look at the information about the event. Jinhyuk remembered how he stood there thinking because of the notification. Taking the sheet in his hand, he read the script and asked if there would be an event to repel waves of monsters. Items and equipment available only during the event will appear on that day, so a gremlin, from which rare items are 100% likely to drop. Jian raised her hand and said that those fortresses that can fight off monsters, retaining more than 50% of their durability, will receive a special blessing. Looking at her, the guy asked what kind of blessing it was. She answered by saying that it would be a buff for 48 hours, increasing the chance of dropping and the amount of experience gained. Jinhyuk rubbed his chin and asked what his role would be in all this. Jinho narrowed his eyes and told him to be patient for a bit. Then he explained that the guy would be a subordinate of the final boss of the game, the Black Knight, a high elf captured by evil. Introducing his character behind the guy, Jinho said that he would need to log in as Herodren and capture human fortresses. The girl leaned back in her chair and said that he would need to destroy the defensive towers in each of the fortresses, but the auto-aim function would be disabled. Jinhyuk tilted his head asking if it was a problem. Looking at the girl, he said that he just takes a bow and that's it. Jian screamed saying that it's easy for him to say, but Herodren is the most accurate character on the entire continent. The girl raised her hands in shock when the protagonist said that he never used auto-aim. Remembering how the guy handled the bow, Jian said that he was too good with the bow. The protagonist chuckled saying that all this without auto-aim, that's why his crits are good. The girl confused the guy by asking if he had a discharge on the bow. He answered saying that he was a simple worker, not believing the words of the guy opposite. She said that an ordinary person cannot shoot so well. Jinho smiling said that after the end of the event, Herodren will become the first raid boss in the world of the Abyss. The protagonist, sitting opposite his brother, asked if there was any need for him to play as him then. Jinho stopped smiling and said that he had thought about it too, but it seemed that the rankers really liked the event, 1 against 100. Jinhyuk narrowed his eyes and said that his skills and behavior in battle were predetermined. Adjusting his glasses, Jinho said that this time they intended to conduct extensive tests, and his fighting style should be similar to Herodren's. The protagonist took the paper in his hand and thought about it. Jinho turned his head and thought about it. Jinhyuk grinned and said that completing the task was a priority. Minor deviations from the plan were allowed. Tilting his head, he said that he would then capture a couple of fortresses in passing. The events take us to the dining room. Jiyeon, sitting opposite Jinhyuk, said that it was amazing. She did not think that he would agree to his offer so easily. The protagonist, remembering his brother's appearance, wanted to say that this was his usual behavior, but decided not to say. Looking at the girl in front of him, the guy asked why she was here, because the document didn't say anything about the Red Queen. Smiling, Jian said that she came to help him with his acting. Clenching her fists, she said that she would log in as a monster and would help him. The protagonist asked, smiling, who would she log in as? Jian raised her chopsticks and thought. She covered her face in embarrassment. Soon, she handed her phone to the guy. Jinhyuk took the phone in his hand. He was really interested. The guy couldn't hold back and burst into tears of laughter. On the screen, the corpse of the Kurura Golem was visible, a huge Frankenstein monster. The protagonist thought about it and said that he looked a lot like her, especially in the hips. Jian raised her hand to hit. Everyone in the dining room trembled from the squabble. The events take us to the studio. The host introduced the guest and asked him to tell them about the Alliance. McAllen answered by saying that the Alliance consists of players who specialize in raids. Sajin, holding a microphone in her hand, asked how the Alliance was created. McAllen smiled and said that the Alliance includes members of Limitless and 5 large and 25 medium-sized guilds. Introducing 2 players, Sajin said that Limitless should include Hansen and Han. Is it possible to lose with such a composition? Hajin, who was sitting next to the guests, said that there was not much time left before the start of the event. What strategy did they choose? The head of the Alliance answered by saying that they concentrated their forces in Ghent Fortress, since it connects all the others. Introducing Herodren, McAllen said that according to the story, Herodren looks down on people, so he will most likely go to Ghent Fortress, as the most significant. Hajin, taking the microphone in his hand, asked the guest if he wanted to say anything before leaving. McAllen interlaced his fingers and said that he wanted to apologize to the people from Abysssoft. Frowning, he said that their hunter would soon become their prey. Jian glanced at the protagonist and said that it was time for them to prepare. The guy grinned, saying that he needed to live up to the expectations of idiots. The events take us to the walls of the fortress. The commander entered the game. Crossing his arms over his chest, McAllen asked if the battle had begun. The guard looked through the telescope. The warrior turned to the commander, saying that the horde had appeared on the horizon. 20,000 monsters led by giants were heading towards the fortress. Squinting, McAllen said that everything was going according to plan. When the horde stopped, the warrior reported the absence of Hiradran. The commander understood that as an archer, Hiradran would not show himself. He frowned, seeing a monster in the distance. In the distance walked Kururu, who was the deputy commander of the Legion of the Abyss. Stroking his chin, the guy mentally said that if the behavior of the famous characters has not changed, then everything is fine. Raising his hand, he ordered everyone to follow the plan. Grinning, the guy mentally said that let these monsters attack the homeless from the Alliance, and they will analyze the monster, and go kill it and Hiradran. The warrior raised his hand asking for permission to ask a question. Having received permission, he asked where to move at the end, when the final battle will take place. McAllen grinned and said that the final battle will take place in Rimmon, opposite their base. Imagining a map, he said that even if they cannot defend themselves, in the end they do not risk anything. The events take us to the fortress of Juldan. The guard yawned mentally saying that Hiradran will head to Ghent anyway. Suddenly, a cloud of dark energy appeared in the sky. A moment later, an explosion occurred. Hiradran, led by monsters, descended from the mountain. The archer landed on the ground. He bared his teeth when the guard called his name in fear. The guards grabbed their weapons, not understanding why he was there. Sajin grabbed her spear and told the audience that Hiradran had suddenly invaded the fortress of Juldan. The elf himself turned and looked at her. He remembered how, standing opposite Kururu, he ordered her to lead the troops to the fortress of Ghent and wait. She should not attack those who would not attack, and in the meantime he was attacking another fortress, and he would not take Ghent, because there were many problems there. Besides, his main body was there. Raising his hand, he said that a quest for a weapon master would appear soon, and this was more important. The protagonist, imagining himself with different weapons, said that the quest would appear in Juldan or Mirden, so there was a point in getting rid of annoying players. Jian in Kururu's body said that when there are many people in the city, everything fills up more slowly. Did he really want to complete the quest comfortably by reducing the number of players? The protagonist turned around saying that he didn't care about others and that when he invaded Julin, he would report the next stage of the plan. Hiradran stood in front of the fortress. The guy looked at the system panel and the current state of the army. Clutching the bow, he said that everything was going according to plan. The guy stood in a stance and pulled the bowstring using various skills. A moment later, an arrow shot into the sky. Sajin, standing on the roof, said that Hiradran had invaded the fortress. The protagonist ran at the head of a group of skeleton archers. The players standing in front of the skeletons died, only managing to report that the players were becoming victims of a surprise attack. Raising her hand, the girl asked how this could happen. She raised her head and froze. Sajin screamed, seeing many shadow arrows in the sky. The arrows flew past her. The protagonist himself appeared in front of the girl. Sajin, looking at the approaching Hiradran, did not understand why the monster looked so attractive. Jinhyuk flew past the girl and slashed at her. Afterwards, the guy stood on the roof of the building. The guards raised their shields, saying that they should calm down. The commander ordered to go forward and use provocation. Hiradran jumped up. He flew past the guards and hit a couple of them. Afterwards, he squinted and looked at the warriors. The protagonist pulled the bowstring. He released an arrow, saying that all that was left for him to do was destroy the symbol of the fortress, the protective tower. The arrow shot forward. A moment later, there was a powerful explosion, then the system reported the successful capture of the fortress. The two guys watched the tower fall, and one of them said with a smile on his face that in the midst of the battle, Sajin died trying to introduce herself to the monster. His companion frowned in displeasure and asked why Hiradran had come to Juldan, adding that McAllen had said that this character looked down on humans like bugs, to which his friend pointed his index finger and closed his eyes, asking if he hadn't read the description to the end, adding that it said that when he led his army, he became a cold-blooded commander, and the guys from the Alliance were trying to monopolize everything. And this would serve as a good lesson for them, so the next target was Ghent Fortress. The tall Ghent Fortress stood under the night sky. Ghent Fortress, the operational headquarters, a light was burning inside, and a male voice was reporting that Hiradran had invaded Juldan. The 4 guild leaders were sitting at a round table, and one of them, with his arms folded, said that they needed to make a plan and prepare. Suddenly, Mirion, the head of the Sharp Eye Guild, pointed his finger at McAllen and asked what he said at the beginning, whether he would definitely come. The guy looked at his comrade and replied that he was not exactly mistaken, because their main forces were concentrated here. The Iron Monster, the head of the Anvil Guild, frowned in displeasure and ordered both of them to stop, because their primary task was to decide how they would act next. Macallan turned his gaze to the man and asked him not to complicate things, because he may seem strong to them, but he was just a rational thinking boss. Then the Iron Monster extended his hand and said that he was too talkative for someone who had sold his soul to the AI, adding that Ghent was the road to the other fortresses, so he would have to occupy this territory. The guy raised his hand to his chin and, presenting a map, said that the path from Julden to Mirden or vice versa in any case lies through the back gate of the Ghent fortress, so the second target would definitely be this place. Mirion suddenly pointed his finger at Macallan again and asked what if he was wrong again, to which he replied that he would leave the alliance then. But unexpectedly for him, Mirion said that he would not escape responsibility so easily, and after defeating Herodrin, he would be excluded from the distribution of items, from which Macallan gritted his teeth in rage and asked himself if he was really allowing himself to do this, because it was only one mistake. Clenching his hands tightly into fists, he added that he needed to be patient, and if he hesitated even a little and avoided answering, he would lose the right to be captain. Having calmed down, he replied that they would do so, because glory was more important to them, to which Mirion put his hand to his face with a smile and, laughing, exclaimed that this was very sincere, and if his determination was so strong, he would follow his orders. The Iron Monster frowned, shifting his gaze. After a few seconds, he looked forward and firmly said that it was time to end the meeting. The guild leaders left the tent. Macallan, left alone, once again clenched his teeth and said with displeasure that he couldn't even believe that some stupid NPC had humiliated him so. Suddenly, a wide smile appeared on his face, and he said to himself that as long as they had them, victory was theirs. At that time, the fortress of Julden was destroyed, and Herodrin was thinking about leaving half of the warriors here and moving on. In front of him and his troops were people on their knees, shouting that if they had invaded Mirden instead of here, they would already be dead. The guy with his hands tied behind his back raised his head and added that they were finished anyway by Limitless, so they should have fun while they can. Hearing this, Herodrin glanced at the prisoner out of the corner of his eye and asked himself, Limitless. Introducing the three guys, he said that in the Abyss, their guild Trashcan often confronted a guild called Limitless. After thinking about this, Herodrin smiled and thanked the prisoner for the useful information, because now he realized that they were in Mirden. With a mad smile on his face, he left, and the prisoners were shot. Opening the system screen in front of him, he thought that since there was such a drinking party, this method would be perfect. Someone was running quickly towards the closed tent. The knight burst into the room, shouting loudly that the horde of monsters had begun to move, but Herodrin was not seen near the back gate. Macallan's face immediately changed, shouting that this could not be. Turning around, the guy thought that they could not have begun to move without a leader. Having run to the place, he stopped abruptly. Trying to catch his breath, Macallan asked what the situation was, when suddenly a crowd shouted that right now the horde led by Kururu was heading south. A thick fog hung over the Mirden fortress. The boy thought, exclaiming in his head if their destination was Mirden, since they definitely had to go through the back gate of Ghent fortress to get there, and if it was moving on its own, when suddenly a knight ran up to him, shouting loudly that the Abyss Hunter had been spotted. The boy held a drawn arrow in his hand, after which the knight shouted that he was in the village, from the back gate. Turning around, Macallan thought, wondering what the guards were doing and why the defense tower was still intact. Pursing his lips, the boy thought that it couldn't be, then wondered if the Abyss Hunter thought the notification window would give away his location, and so didn't touch it. Stretching his palm forward, he shouted loudly, ordering the guards to follow them immediately. The leader gritted his teeth, hearing that a group of 100 monsters were currently attacking the western gate. Macallan frowned, ordering the western gate to be blocked, as they would follow them once they had sorted this out. Kururu approached the elf, saying that it had been a while since they had seen each other. Herodin asked him how it had gone, to which the deputy smiled, saying that they had gone to Mirden, and then asked how he had broken through the back gate. Looking at him, the man replied that he had used a treasure gremlin. Kururu smirked, asking why he was dragging such a weakling along, to which Herodin, without turning around, replied that it was the easiest way, using a speed buff to distract the guards. Imagining the scene, he added that these incompetents had gone mad and ran after the spoils, abandoning their post. Lowering his head, Herodin added that the Limitless were waiting for them in Mirden. Kururu turned to him in surprise. Baring his teeth, he asked if the elf meant those Limitless, to which the man nodded, answering, the guild that Hansen is a member of. The boy scratched his cheek. Wary, he wondered if someone remembered him. A loud cry was heard from behind Hansen, asking if he was really going to wander around alone. Turning to the girl, the boy asked where she had been. Folding her arms over her chest, Hanan answered that something was going on in Ghent right now, and Haradrim was heading their way. The elf turned his head back, interested. Smiling, he approached the boys, interrupting them. Coco introduced himself, asking if they could spare him a minute, since he had something to say. Hanan was surprised, asking what he wanted to talk about. Coco smiled widely, asking if they wanted to defeat Haradrim together. Mirrodin Fortress, the sky was bright. A female voice was heard asking if he was suggesting to leave and attack them from the rear, to which the male voice replied, yes, since he had already confirmed Limitless Village, and he could use their help. Henyang looked at the boy coldly and said that if they managed to defeat them, what would they do with the reward? To which he smiled and firmly replied that they would divide it into the number of people who would participate in the operation. After hearing this, they shook hands, and the girl said that she liked it and hoped that they would work well together. Hajin, the host of the Abyss World, clenched his hand into a fist and exclaimed that he would cover the events in Mirrodin for the audience, since there were rumors that Haradrim was heading there. He and Sajin were looking at the people from a high tower and asking his partner if she thought he would be able to take the fortress, to which she replied that she believed that the valiant players would win and avenge her. A girl was watching them from the side. She suddenly smiled and said that everything was clear to her now. It was Hannah, a member of the Limitless Guild and also a streamer. She winked and said that she did not need to explain anything, to which her viewers, laughing in the chat, said that it was true, after which they asked if she was really not going to stop Haradrim. The girl opened the system screen in front of her and asked in surprise why she would suddenly do this, to which the viewers replied that she was also part of the guild, and below they wrote that she simply did not have the skills, and this was logical. Hannah winked again and said in a cute voice that it was not true and they should be grateful that such a cutie joined them. The girl then walked up to Pong and put her hands on his shoulders and said that he should introduce himself to the audience, to which he blushed with embarrassment, and exclaimed that he went to the same training hall as her. Hannah then asked the guy to tell the audience about Haradrim, to which he, with his index finger pointed and his eyes closed, explained that their opponent, an elf archer, served the Black Knight and, as they had seen in Juldan, was a cold-blooded commander. The streamer smiled widely and asked what his thoughts were on the upcoming battle. Pong put his hand to his chin and replied that he thought that he would use another original and unexpected strategy. Despite being an archer, he would probably fight in close combat. But before he could finish speaking, the western gate behind him was attacked. Hannah raised her fists at what she saw and joyfully shouted that it looked like the battle had just begun, so it was time for them to go. But as soon as she said this, a blue hand rose up on the wall of the fortress. 2 skeleton swordsmen climbed up to them. Pong immediately took out his crossbow and said to himself that this was a great chance to impress the girl. With these thoughts, the guy fired an arrow, but it whistled past the skeleton's head. Seeing this, Hannah pitifully drew her eyebrows together and asked if Pong had turned off auto-aim, to which he answered confusedly, yes. With a blush on his cheeks, he looked at the girl and explained that she said that good skills were needed to get into the Limitless Guild, so he was practicing, to which she, hearing this, raised her fists and joyfully said that if he wanted to get there so much, then she could just. But before she could finish speaking, the surface beneath her feet broke. Pong and Hannah lost their balance. As they fell, the boys began to scream loudly. A few seconds later, a loud bang was heard. Dust rose up, after which loud screams were heard that the western gate had been destroyed. A huge silhouette of a monster appeared in the shadows. Karura came out, saying that people needed to be eaten, while the people began to run away, screaming loudly that if the monster caught someone, it would eat them. Hannah clenched her hand into a fist, bending down to the ground. The corpse hit the ground, ordering everyone to be killed. He pressed the ground with all his might. Smiling, he looked at his bloody belly and stood up. At that very second, a huge wave of blood burst out. Pressing against the wall, the people fearfully thanked the one who covered them. Looking closely at the monster's belly, the guy asked why the belly was still open. Everyone immediately clenched their teeth in fear. Hannah opened her mouth, trembling, asking if such a thing was even possible in this game. Suddenly, a sullen Haradrim came out from Karura's stomach. Crouching down, the elf pulled the bowstring. Releasing it, he activated a rain of arrows. A dark whirlwind began in the air. Countless arrows were aimed at the people who were trying to run away with loud screams. Noticing Pong, Haradrim asked if this was Karura's little friend, to which the corpse replied that the boy's level was not that high. Frowning, the girl wondered in her head what they were talking about. Putting his hand behind his back, the elf asked the monster to deal with the boy himself. Suddenly, Karura pushed off the ground with all his might. Putting his shoulder forward, he pushed Pong up with a malicious smile. Grabbing his stomach, the boy began to spit blood in the air. Hannah excitedly shouted his name. Taking hold of the arrow, Haradrim was surprised that the monster hit his friend so hard, and even though it was a game, he was sure it hurt. Pulling the bowstring, the elf thought it was time to finish. Turning around, the girl tightly grabbed the hilt of the sword in her hands. In fear, she pursed her lips, mentally begging someone to save her. A strange sound was immediately heard from the side. The elf pricked up his ears, turning his head back. Hansen stood in front of his partner and thought that he was aiming for her neck, but he was able to dodge. Suddenly, their comrades ran up to them, asking if they were okay. Coco, taking out his blades, shouted, asking the elf how he could use such a vile tactic in shifts. Seeing them, Hiradren frowned in displeasure. 30 minutes ago, a powerful explosion shook the city. Coco, with his hand clenched into a fist, said that the time had come, they would come from behind and attack Hiradren as planned. Hansen then looked at Hanan and said that the guild members should defend this place, to which she firmly replied that she understood. After a while, they stood on a cliff, looking at the rising smoke and dust. Coco pointed to a tall tower and explained that it was a mobile fortress. It was needed by the enemy for protection, increased mobility and placement of troops, adding that the commander should be there. Hearing this, Hansen raised his eyebrows and said that they should go inside. In less than a minute, they were climbing the stairs, destroying skeletal swordsmen. Hansen quickly destroyed the enemies in his path with his strikes. Having reached the very top, they opened the doors. But suddenly they froze, because there was no one inside. With horror in his eyes, Coco exclaimed that this couldn't be happening, since there was no information that the boss was on the battlefield. Han Sung turned to his comrade and asked if it was possible for the enemies to attack without the boss, to which he replied no, since the fact of the two enemy commanders meeting was recorded by observers from the Alliance. Then Han Young folded her arms and said that she had just received information about the guild members, that Hiradren had appeared from Kurura's belly. Hearing this, the guys looked at her in shock, shouting that this couldn't be happening. The girl turned away and said that this place was bait, and they needed to hurry back to Mirden. Currently, all the guild members raised their swords against the enemy, and the host said that there was quite an interesting situation in front of the viewers. The members of Limitless and Chung Sung came face to face with Hiradren. The guy looked at his partner and asked her if she hadn't said that she had met him in Jolden recently. How would things develop? Sajin angrily squeezed a piece of the fortress and asked discontentedly, met. Clenching her hand tightly into a fist, she exclaimed that she died because of him. The only good thing was that thanks to the control command, she did not receive a penalty. Having said this, she folded her hands and calmly said that she lost control for a second and, simply put, he is strong, incredibly strong. Hiradren looked at his opponents with displeasure. Hanyan stood in a stance. Not far from her stood Coco with raised blades. And in front of the huge fat monster stood the second place in the PvP rating, the vice leader of the Limitless Guild Hansen and the junior member of the Limitless Guild, the famous streamer Hannah. Coco frowned, looking at Hiradren. Looking into the enemy's eyes, the boy thought that he had a crazy aura. Coco turned around, shouting that he and Hannah would take care of Kururu, and then asked Hansen and Hanan to take care of Hiradren. Hansen turned his head, thinking that Hannah would be useless in this situation. Rushing forward, he shouted loudly that he would take care of the elf himself, and ordered Hannah and Hanan to take care of Kururu. Hiradren extended his bow in front of him, blocking the attack. Hannah clenched her hand into a fist, asking what about her. The boy suddenly turned to her, asking her to run as far away as possible. The girl's expression changed, saying that she knew how to fight too. Holding her sword tightly in her hand, she asked if he knew that, while the enemy appeared behind her. Before she could react, she received a strong blow to the side. Hanan looked forward. Crouching down, her gaze was fixed on the monster. With a dash forward, Hansen approached the enemy. Jumping, Hiradren flew back several meters. Frowning, he wondered if the boy had lured him here so that he could not target anyone else. Swinging his sword, Hansen shouted that he would be his opponent. Suddenly, he noticed a flying blow to the side. Having struck the enemy, Hiradren threw him away. Pulling the bowstring, the elf released several arrows at once. Swinging his sword, Hansen began to parry the attacks. Leaning down, he began to confidently advance forward. Standing up, he tried to hit the enemy. Hiradren suddenly jumped up. Finding himself behind the boy, he aimed arrows at him. Gritting his teeth, Hansen turned his head back in horror. Jumping, the elf pushed off the boy's body, dropping him. Smiling, he thought that his target was clearly not Hansen. His gaze fell on the worried Hanan. After receiving several arrow strikes, the girl screamed loudly. Her legs suddenly began to buckle. Without thinking twice, Kururu grabbed her with his hand. The monster brought her to his face with a malicious grin. The corpse's belly opened. Hanan's face changed, trying to break free. After some time, the corpse's belly tightened. Cold sweat began to drip down Hansen's face, when he suddenly called out to Hanan. Frowning, the boy realized that the enemy had planned an attack on her while fighting him. Reaching for an arrow, Harridan said that there were 2 left, while Hansen thought that the elf was undeniably strong. Hansen stood in front of the dark elf with his sword raised. He saw Koko fighting Kururu and knew that it would be difficult for him to face him alone. Gritting his teeth, the boy realized that he needed to finish it all with one blow. After these thoughts, an incredibly powerful energy began to gather around him. At that very second, Hansen swung. Hiradren managed to jump at the last moment. Suddenly, his opponent called out to him in the air, causing him to suddenly raise his head. Hansen brought his sword behind his back and shouted that even he could not dodge this in the air. Having shouted this, he threw his sword towards his opponent, and he pulled the bowstring. Having released the arrow, Hiradren wondered if he had really thrown his sword at him, adding that he could simply reflect it. But suddenly the sword, shrouded in light, dodged the arrow of darkness. It flew over his left shoulder, slightly grazing it. At this time, the dark arrow flew to Hansen. The guy did not have time to dodge, and the enemy's attack pierced him through. Realizing what had happened, he said with horror in his eyes that it was impossible, after which he asked himself if he could really repel the attack even in such a situation. Hansen fell to his knees and Haradrim sank to the ground. He then put another arrow in his quiver. Looking at his wound, the dark elf asked how his opponent changed the trajectory of the blade in the air. Hansen kept his hand on the hole in his body and did not answer. Then Haradrim pulled the bowstring again and said to himself that it was as if he was fighting a real person, because his artificial intelligence was incredibly advanced. With these thoughts, he prepared to shoot, and the hosts, looking at this, shouted that even the powerful guild Limitless was no match for Haradrim. When suddenly Macallan opened his mouth and addressed his troops. Waving his hand, he ordered them to attack, and the powerful army rushed to attack. Seeing this, Hansen smiled and said that his opponent may have won the battle, but lost the war. Then Haradrim lowered his bow. A few seconds later, he pointed it at the sky and used sniper mode, shadow arrow and hunter's roar. Releasing a powerful arrow shrouded in darkness, he firmly said that the army of the abyss will not lose. The guy turned back in horror, thinking about the tower. The arrow quickly flew up. A few seconds later, it flew into the tower at great speed, killing it. The hosts opened their mouths wide in horror. Hansen turned back, shouting that this could not be. Haradrim held on tightly to the bow, reading in the system that he captured the fortress of Mirden. Putting the bow behind his back, he said that he was leaving the rest to Kururu. The monster with a hand sticking out of his stomach replied that he understood everything. Putting on his hood, the elf said that the master was calling. The next day, the sun was shining brightly outside. Jin-hyuk was sitting at the table with a smile on his face. Reading the chat, he said that people received the event quite warmly. Continuing to scroll through the comments, the guy added that people only had to recapture the fortresses. The protagonist grinned and said that he thought he needed to spend more time on his character, and then decided to log into the game. Walking down the street of Ghent Fortress, Jin-hyuk heard someone recruiting people to take back Juldan Fortress. Frowning, the guy thought that they were gathering in Ghent Fortress because he had captured Juldan and Mirden. After all, he needed to take it too. Extending his finger forward, the protagonist decided to open his inventory. Seeing the mysterious treasure chest, he thought he should investigate it. Jin-hyuk placed his hands on it and carefully lifted the lid, from which a bright light was coming. The guy was speechless, his mouth hanging open. Looking at his palm, he asked if it was a mark, and then read its characteristics. A mark is a special type of tattoo, and even the lowest rank versions can be useful if you collect the whole set. Flipping through his inventory, Jin-hyuk thought there was something else, and then saw a hidden device. Smiling, he thought this item was really cool. Noticing an incoming message, the protagonist asked what it was. The guy narrowed his eyes, thinking with a sly smile that the offer was quite tempting. Walking through Mark's village, Jin-hyuk noticed a boy waving at him. He approached him, saying that the boy had leveled up a lot since their last meeting, so he asked if it was time to change classes, to which Pang sheepishly scratched his cheek, saying that was the problem. Smiling, he said that he needed to take a quest in Juldan, but he couldn't get in. The protagonist laughed, asking when they were going to the dungeon, to which the boy replied that he was waiting for someone. Suddenly, a loud scream of a girl was heard from behind, calling Pang. Jin-hyuk narrowed his eyes, starting to look at her. Recognizing the smiling girl as Han, the guy wondered if this was Hansen's younger sister. The girl waved at the guys and apologized for being late. The protagonist smiled and introduced himself, simultaneously saying to himself that he never thought that he would be able to meet Hansen's sister here. Hannah looked at the guy with a warm smile on her face and asked if he was the one who cleared the hidden dungeon on the server opening day, adding that he could speak informally. Without taking her eyes off him, she said that from now on she would call him uncle, then asked if she could start a broadcast in the dungeon since she was a streamer, to which the protagonist, putting his hand on his hip, replied that he was fine with it. After receiving consent, Hana put her index finger up and exclaimed that she thought that Jin-hyuk was really drawn to hidden dungeons, and this time too. Hearing this, the guy raised his eyebrows in shock and shouted, asking what? Pong, putting his hand on his chest, laughed and said that he took first place in the event and received a hidden quest. Then the protagonist looked away and said to himself with satisfaction that he did not even expect that he would have a chance to get a second mark so soon. After a while, Hana started the stream and said that today they would clear the hidden dungeons, adding that the raid would be slow, but time was limited. Then, turning her gaze, she thoughtfully said that they had about 5 hours. Jin-hyuk was shocked by what he heard. Clenching his hand into a fist, he asked himself if it was really 5 hours, adding that they would not have time. Pong, closing his eyes, smiled and said that he was an archer. The protagonist smiled confusedly and said that he was a warrior, and the chat reacted to him in surprise, asking if he was the same Sid who cleared the hidden dungeon on the very first day. Hana pointed her index finger and exclaimed that it was, adding that she wanted to get some tips from the guy on how to clear the hidden dungeon. But before she could finish speaking, the protagonist grabbed her from behind and said that it was time to go. After a while, the team stood in front of the entrance to the dungeon, and a notification appeared in front of them, informing them that this was a hidden rescue and escort group quest in which they had to rescue and escort Inertia. The protagonist looked away and wondered what kind of tedious and time-limited quest this was. After thinking about it, he and his comrades stepped forward, saying that it was time to end this. They entered a damp and dark cave. When suddenly Hana stared at something. Raising her fists, she suddenly screamed, asking why the protagonist needed a bow if he was a warrior. But Pong suddenly frowned and asked her to wait a bit, because there were monsters ahead. Skeletons came out of the darkness with glowing eyes. At the same second, they rushed to attack. The streamer also jumped up. With a sword in her hands, she rushed towards the skeletons, shouting that she would hold them back, and they should cover her. But several opponents pounced on her sword at once. The girl closed her eyes out of fear, realizing that she was being pressed. But after a few seconds, she slowly opened them. There was a magic arrow in the skull of each skeleton. Squinting, the girl asked if they had all been killed by magic arrows. She turned back sharply. In the hands of the main character, Hana, she noticed those same taut arrows. They quickly flew into the heads of the monsters, killing them. Smiling, the streamer asked if the guy had really finished them all off with a headshot and turned off auto-aiming. Turning to her, Jin-hyuk nodded his head in agreement. The girl happily ran closer to him, asking why he chose a warrior and not an archer, because if he were one, he would have become at least a ranker, and the audience would probably go crazy and call him a god. Crouching down, Hana asked if he was a ranker archer in the abyss, to which the protagonist held out his hand in front of her, answering no. Pong noticed the items with a smile, informing the guy about this, to which Jin-hyuk offered to share them. In front of them, the guys saw the 11th curse bracelet. Taking it, Hana said that it was a rare class item, although its features were strange. Raising her index finger up, she said that its abilities are good, but the penalty is too big, because it is like a double-edged sword. Jin-hyuk reassured her, answering that everything is fine as long as the combo is completed, when suddenly Pong pursed his lips, saying that it would be great if it was that easy to do, and for now such an item is not for him. Hana smiled and said that she agreed with that and asked what about the warrior. Putting the bracelet on himself, the protagonist said that it would be a shame to waste it, thinking that it would go well with his 9th cursed ring. Pong turned around, asking if they were going any further. An hour later, the group arrived at an unknown place. Sitting down on the ground, Jin-hyuk said that he had received quite a few items on the way here, while Pong held a crossbow in his hand, saying that he liked it, and Hana was happy with her new cloak with a smile. Holding it, the girl said that it made her invisible, and that in itself was adorable. Turning his head to the side, the guy asked why he changed his class from assassin to warrior. Turning his head with a smile, Pong answered to join the Limitless Guild, since only warriors can pass their test. The girl nodded, adding that Hanan gets very strict when it comes to this. Crouching down, the protagonist asked everyone to prepare for battle. Pong's eyes widened and he activated his eagle vision. Looking into the distance, he saw a female silhouette in front of his eyes. The guy was surprised and shouted that there was a woman there, enchanted in shackles. The girl sitting on her knees was the heiress of the Rose family. Pong grabbed his weapon tightly and shouted that they needed to hurry up and save her, when suddenly Jin-hyuk stopped him, saying that it was a trap and they could easily fall under attack by NPCs. Hana put on her hood, saying that she would hide and scout out the situation. The girl carefully moved forward. Looking out, she saw several monsters in the darkness. Squinting, she counted 5 ghouls. Looking further, Hannah noticed a bright monster with a name. It was very dark in the cave, and the protagonist asked what the situation was like, to which the girl replied that there were 5 ghouls. She frowned as she looked at her comrades and added that there was also a monster with a name that looked like a ghost. Hearing this, Jin-hyuk frowned and said to himself that ghost monsters neutralize 90% of damage from physical attacks, but take twice as much damage from magic. They have a swordsman and 2 ranged, so there is only one way. With these thoughts, he extended his hand and said that he had a plan. Hannah should run towards the ghost and try to buy some time. Lowering his hand, he added that he and Pong would get rid of the ghouls and then join her. After telling the plan, the 3 of them rushed forward. At this time, the ghost knight stood over the captive. With his head held high, he ordered her to surrender and submit to the abyss. Nerja looked at the ghost with disdain in her eyes and said that he was a traitor to the human race, and then asked if he was not ashamed at all. Hearing this, the monster waved his hand and shouted that if she really wanted to die, then so be it. He pulled out a sword from behind his back. But at the very last moment, Hannah blocked the blow. Holding back the onslaught of the sword, she said that it was very hard, adding that she remembered that the monster with the name was comparable in strength to mid-level bosses. The ghost raised his weapon and shouted that she was not making fun of him. After these words, he began to attack furiously. His blow reached the shoulder of his opponent, and blood spurted out. Hannah looked at the wound and said to herself that he barely grazed her, but it hurt like hell. The ghost swung again and shouted that it was time for her to die. But suddenly, a bright arrow flashed in the darkness. It hit the monster's head perfectly. The protagonist, with his bow raised, breathed a sigh of relief and said that they would have been in big trouble if they had come a few seconds later. After saying this, he frowned and thought that the only magic the 3 of them had was his arrows, but that was not enough. But he could strengthen them with the 11th curse bracelet. As soon as he thought about this, clouds appeared above the ghost. At the same second, a powerful lightning struck the enemy. The monster fell to one knee, telling the protagonist that he was just an insignificant worm. After saying these words, he tensed his legs, and the floor beneath him cracked. Then, with burning eyes, the ghost took off. The protagonist quickly appeared next to his shoulder, putting his hand on it. Jin-hyuk took the arrow, trying to pull it. At the last moment, the guy managed to duck, dodging a strong blow. He immediately pushed off the ground with force. Jin-hyuk jumped to the side and pulled the bowstring. Sitting on the ground, Pong opened his eyes wide in surprise. Talon smiled maliciously and said that the enemy would not be able to resist. He dashed forward and shouted to the abyss, when suddenly the protagonist noticed rose petals, wondering if this was some kind of skill. Starting to swing his weapon, the ghost activated the sword dance skill. In front of him, a drawing of a rose was scratched on the wall, after which he activated the bloody rose dance. Hannah looked away in horror, calling out to her uncle. Talon smiled smugly, saying that a fool challenged the abyss. At that moment, a strong blow flew at his head. He put his hand in front of him and asked if the enemy was still alive. His entire body was enveloped in light, and the ghost screamed loudly. Jin-hyuk quickly appeared behind him. Jumping up, he aimed an arrow at the enemy's head. Suddenly, a loud explosion was heard, resounding throughout the cave. Thick dust rose up. The protagonist jumped out from behind it. Covering his face with his hand, Talon called the guy a pathetic bastard. He rushed forward, shouting for the enemy to say goodbye to his life. Jin-hyuk looked closely at the enraged ghost, wondering if he had entered berserk mode and it would be difficult to repel his attacks. Crouching down, the guy thought that he would defeat the enemy in close combat. He raised his bow in front of him and quickly blocked the attack. His bow cracked slightly from the strong blow. Grabbing the arrow, the guy's eye lit up brightly. With a blow, Jin-hyuk inserted the arrow into the ghost's neck. Talon gritted his teeth in pain. The protagonist jumped up, bidding him farewell. Kicking Talon with his legs, the guy threw him away. The enemy's body lit up brightly, causing him pain. Still kneeling, he whispered, "Abyss?" His upper body dissolved before he could finish, and the system reported that they had defeated a mid-tier boss. The defeated ghost vanished into thin air, and the protagonist let out a sigh of relief. Looking at his weapon, he said to himself that it seemed like its durability had decreased while he was trying to block that attack. Hannah watched from the side, asking the chat if they had seen that, to which they responded in the chat that Jin-hyuk was a real psycho. After a short pause, the protagonist extended his hand towards the Nerja family sword of unique quality. Picking it up, Hannah happily said that she congratulated him, as it suited him perfectly as a warrior, to which he asked why he thought she wanted it. Raising her fists, the girl exclaimed that it was true, as any swordsman would want it, adding that she had even reached the 5th level of sword mastery. Hearing this, he handed her the sword, telling her to take it. Taking the sword in her hands, the streamer asked with a shaking voice if this was true. Then Jinhyuk presented the chest and said that in exchange she would give her the chest with the hidden class items that she had received, to which she replied that this was too much. Without thinking twice, the guy with a smile on his face offered to give her everything that dropped from the boss monsters, to which she nodded and exclaimed that she liked this offer. After that, Jinhyuk sat down on the floor and suggested that everyone take a little rest and move on. The captive Nerja was freed from her shackles. Hannah, sitting next to her comrade, looked at him and said that she thought that he was in the top 100 in rank in the abyss. The protagonist looked ahead and replied that she was right, to which she, without taking her eyes off him, asked what his nickname was, after which he replied that it was a secret. When the chat started suggesting different nicknames, the girl looked away and asked if it wasn't Corn Silk. Jinhyuk's eyes widened in shock upon hearing his nickname. The streamer covered her mouth with her hand and quietly said that it couldn't be, because he couldn't stand Limitless, and here he would go with her in a group, after which she asked if the main character wanted to join the guild. Drawing an image of an archer in her head, she said that they were currently recruiting only them for the raid on Harridan. The main character looked away and said that he didn't know, after which he asked Pong if he had found anything. The guy turned around and said yes, adding that the boss he had killed commanded the Knights of the Rose family, and the final boss was the captive's uncle. Hannah slightly lowered her head from what she heard and said to herself, "Family feuds," and the main character asked where they could find him. Pong looked at the girl and asked her to answer. Then Nerja raised her hand and exclaimed that he should wait at the entrance, so she would lead them. After a while, all four of them walked through the cave, and in total, they took part in 2 battles. Hannah fought mainly, she always rushed into battle first. Swinging a unique sword, she did this in order to test it. The protagonist watched her from the side, saying to himself that she fought steadfastly and, maybe because the family was engaged in martial arts, she knew the basics so well. Looking at the excited Pong, he said to himself that although he was an archer, he gave him a spare dagger, adding that although a crossbow is stronger than a bow, it does not hurt to have a melee weapon, and in this state they returned to the entrance. Pointing ahead, Pong shouted that there was light. Nerja suddenly put her hand to the side. Covering the guys, she said that it was a trap. The gates suddenly began to move. With a loud bang, they quickly closed. Footsteps were heard in the shadows. Coming out, a man in armor said that humanity had no future. He had sharp spikes on his shoulders and horns on his helmet, and he said that the abyss would be the only salvation. Putting his weapon forward, he ordered them to fall down and bow to her. The guys grabbed their weapons, preparing to attack. The protagonist narrowed his eyes, recognizing him as a black knight using dark magic. The knight continued to look at them, menacingly saying that this was the last warning, and asked Nerja to join the abyss. The girl frowned, menacingly shouting that she did not want to, because she was not going to become a monster. The dark knight frowned. Pulling out a sharp weapon forward, Nerio shouted that he was challenging them to a fair duel according to all the rules of the knightly code, after which he activated the glorious duel skill. The sounds of an iron fence were heard again. He began to quickly descend. Falling to the ground, the iron cage closed in on the boys. Jinhyuk frowned. Crouching, he wondered if this was a small version of the 1 versus 100 event, after which a glorious duel was opened. Without taking his eyes off them, Nerio said that he would give them 3 minutes. Suddenly, he stuck his spear into the ground. Folding his arms over his chest, the knight asked him to determine in what order the victims would be torn to shreds by him. Hannah turned to the boy, saying that she would be the first, so she asked him to analyze the knight's patterns, and if he thought the enemy was too strong, then let him run away. Frowning, Jinhyuk answered no, because he received 2 chests with hidden class items. Turning to the frightened Pong, the protagonist said that he would be the last. With a flash of his eye, the knight ordered the intruder to take a step forward. Hannah quickly jumped forward, and Nerio asked if she would be the first victim. He quickly grabbed the weapon tightly. With red eyes, he turned to her, ordering her to come closer. The girl crossed her arms and jumped forward. She swung her sword, while the opponent blocked her strike. The streamer did not take her eyes off him. Frowning deeply, she thought that one chance was enough. Hannah jumped up and rushed to attack. She delivered a powerful blow, but the Dark Knight blocked it with his hand. The protagonist watched the battle from the cage, thinking that she was doing better than he expected, but still, she was not as good as Henyang or Han Sung, and this would be especially noticeable now. The streamer was breathing heavily during the fight. When suddenly, she clenched her teeth and swung. The girl made a powerful lunge forward. But unexpectedly for her, the opponent grabbed her hand. After that, with a powerful jerk, he threw her into the wall. Then, he swung a huge spear. Filling it with powerful magical energy, he threw it towards the opponent. There was a powerful explosion. The spear landed half a meter from Hana, who was sitting on the floor and saying that she was almost dead. Mirio jumped up. Hearing the characteristic sound, the streamer turned around in fear. Suddenly, the boss hit the place where she was sitting with all his might. But he suddenly raised his head in surprise. There was no one at the place of the blow. Turning around, he saw Hana out of the corner of his eye, who jumped back 10 meters. She was breathing heavily and understood that her endurance was almost at its limit. The main character, looking at her, also understood this and said to himself that he was next in line. Remembering his recent battle with Talon, the guy said to himself that the durability of his bow had dropped to 35%, and this was bad, because it could break right during the battle, and he had no other weapon. With these thoughts, he looked away. Seeing Pong crying, Jin-hyuk raised his eyebrows in surprise. After a few seconds, he smiled and asked if he could borrow it for a while. The guy looked at his comrade in confusion, not understanding anything. At this time, the boss was advancing on Hana. The girl took out a regeneration potion and thought that if she used it, she would be able to survive the first phase. With these thoughts, she drank the potion. Mirio's eyes suddenly lit up with fury and he screamed, asking how she dared to do such an impudence during a noble duel. Seeing this, the streamer put the potion down and asked in fear what it was. An incredibly powerful red aura enveloped the boss, and he screamed that he would kill her. Hana frowned in displeasure and asked if he really went berserk because of a sip of the potion. The knight reached out and rushed towards the girl. He grabbed her face sharply. Mirio lifted Hana up, saying that it was a shame to stain his hands with her blood. His gaze lit up as he swung at her. The streamer clenched her teeth and closed her eyes in fear. Suddenly, she raised her eyelids, looking forward in surprise. Raising her head, Hana noticed that she was hanging by her cloak on the wall. Turning around, Mirio asked the second intruder to come out. Jin-hyuk grinned maliciously. He had 3 flasks in his hands at once. Opening them, the guy immediately poured everything into himself, raising his stats. The knight's body began to be enveloped in mana. Taking the form of a berserker, Mirio said that the guy must really want to humiliate him. Seeing a bright flash in front of him, the protagonist thought that this was definitely not an intentional creation of problems in the game. Then why did the knight do this? The guy knew that once the first phase of the boss monsters passed, all their stats would be refreshed, so if anyone survived until the second, the danger would be over. Throwing away the flasks, he thought that he didn't have much time, because there was less than an hour left. Turning towards Han, Jin-hyuk thought that now she was like a younger sister to him who was in trouble. With a heavy sigh, the girl called the protagonist an idiot, and he immediately thought that he could forget about his sister. Taking an arrow in his hand, Jin-hyuk said that the act was more than justified. Grinning, he asked if they would end it quickly. Without taking his eyes off him, Mirio said that the guy would die the most painful death. Both of them jumped, making a dash forward. The knight's gaze shone brightly. Swinging, he tried to kill the protagonist. Several magic arrows immediately pierced Mirio's body. The protagonist jumped, managing to dodge the attack. Jin-hyuk looked down on his opponent. He grabbed his weapon tightly. Crouching to the ground, the guy dealt several strong blows to Mirio. The knight menacingly turned his head back, shouting that the enemy used to have a bow. Holding a knife in his hand, Jin-hyuk smiled maliciously. Mirio turned around with displeasure and asked how he did it. The protagonist smiled maliciously and replied that there was nothing unusual about it, a simple little trick, but he would have to be more careful because he had to look up. Raising his head, the knight saw a cloud above him. At the same moment, a powerful lightning struck him. Cracks appeared on his helmet. The berserker mode was dispelled, and Mirio said that his opponent was not like the others, so he would fight with honor and knock him out. Seeing this, Jin-hyuk frowned and said to himself that the knight was no longer in berserker mode, which meant the second phase had begun. A shield began to materialize on the boss's left hand. He summoned black armor and took a fighting stance. The protagonist stared at his opponent tensely. Pointing his spear, the boss used the Black Rose skill. His eyes were burning. At the same moment, an incredibly powerful magical energy was released from the spear. Its flow rushed past the protagonist. He looked at it out of the corner of his eye and said to himself that he felt this incredibly destructive force, adding that even a small scratch would lead to death. At the same second, he rushed forward. The guy used a power strike, causing his blade to be enveloped in a bright glow. The blade whistled through the air. The protagonist of power hit the enemy, but he managed to put up a shield. Mirio calmly looked at the enemy. From what he saw, Jin-hyuk frowned and said to himself that the attack would not hurt him while he was in armor, but this was not a problem, because it could be pierced. As soon as he thought about it, his opponent began to create distance, but he immediately rushed after him. Seeing this, the boss was surprised. the protagonist swung, using a power strike. Nario raised his shield again and shouted for the guy to attack, because he would still fall from his spear. But as soon as he said this, Jin-hyuk's powerful blow reached his helmet. A dent appeared on the helmet, from which cracks emanated, and the boss asked him in displeasure how he accelerated his attacks, after which he shouted, "What kind of tricks are these?" Grinning, the protagonist thought that a power attack was a basic warrior skill, but due to pumped-up agility and a dagger in his hands, his speed increased by an order of magnitude. Without taking his eyes off the Dark Knight, the guy thought that at the moment, none of his attacks would work on an enemy in armor. Swinging his sword, Jin-hyuk thought that the best thing he could do now was to unleash a flurry of blows to knock him down with lightning. Attacking Nario, the protagonist's blows were constantly blocked by his shield. The enemy's helmet suddenly cracked. Jin-hyuk grabbed the dagger's handle tightly. Hitting the knight hard, he rushed forward. Running away, the guy looked back at Nario, who was burning with pain. Gritting his teeth, the knight put the spear on the ground. Turning around, Jin-hyuk thought that it would soon be over. The enemy's eyes were shining brightly with anger. Raising a bright ball in his hand, he activated the binding thorn. Noticing the sprouts, the protagonist became wary. The thorn had grown together from above. Jumping up, the protagonist held two weapons in his hands. Nario tightly grabbed the spear's handle. Frowning, he ordered to attack. Smiling, Jin-hyuk said that he was joking. Pulling the bowstring, he quickly fired 3 arrows at once. The guy carefully watched how and where they flew. Jumping off, the protagonist noticed arrows in the enemy's knee. Gritting his teeth, the knight said that the guy was cunning. Enveloped in bright mana, he screamed loudly in pain. His legs began to tremble violently. Activating the berserker mode, the knight rushed forward. The protagonist blocked the blow with the bow, after which its part was destroyed. A smile appeared on the guy's face. Looking at the bow, Jin-hyuk thought that everything was going according to plan. In fact, this plan calculated the durability of the bow, and at the moment when the weapon was broken and his hands were free, he would use it. The guy immediately stretched his hand forward with burning eyes. He grabbed the enemy's face tightly. A burning dagger suddenly appeared in Jin-hyuk's hand. At that very second, the protagonist swung. The blade of the dagger passed through Nario's neck. The knight fell to his knees, and scarlet blood began to flow onto the ground, while the spectators wrote that they had goosebumps. Frowning, the opponent said, "This is the end of a traitor." His body suddenly began to dissolve, while Jin-hyuk watched him, and the system reported that Nario was defeated. In the real world, evening came, the main character's house. Jin-hyuk yawned, waiting for the kettle to boil. Suddenly, he turned to the game capsule. Looking at it, he thought about how much happened yesterday. That day, after defeating the boss, the dungeon opened. There was already a bright moon in the sky. Hana and Pong happily rushed to them. Nerja, folding his hands, thanked the guys for saving him, adding that he will not forget their kindness, and if they pass by, then let them look into their house, because she would like to ask the heroes for a favor. After these words, she bowed and said that she would go, and a notification appeared in front of the team that the hidden dungeon had been cleared. Hana, approaching the protagonist, handed him the chest. When the guy said that it was a pity that the boss did not drop anything, the girl began to cry. Pong, pitifully knitting his eyebrows, looked at his chest. After a short pause, he looked up at Jin-hyuk and addressed him. Suddenly, he abruptly handed him the chest and shouted for him to take his treasure too. Hearing this, the protagonist's eyes widened in shock and he shouted, asking why. Then Pong, without taking his eyes off his comrade, replied that this time he had done nothing and it would be better if he took it. Without thinking twice, Jin-hyuk took both chests and thanked the guys with a wide smile on his face. Looking at the sky, he thought with a wide smile on his face that he couldn't even believe that he had received 3 hidden chests, including his, in such a short time. While he was thinking about this, the streamer raised her hand and asked if he was not in a guild, if he wanted to. But before she could finish speaking, the guy loudly shouted, "Leave!" After which his character left the game. Left alone, the guys froze in shock and wondered if he had really just run away like that. The night sky was strewn with stars. At this time, the main character, with a cup of tea in his hands, was saying to himself that, remembering yesterday's events, he wanted to play again. After these thoughts, he lay down in the capsule. After giving the command to enter, the capsule closed. He appeared in front of the dungeon where he had finished the game last time. Looking around, the guy said to himself that his bow was broken, so he needed to go to the city. Suddenly, a message notification appeared next to him. Ji-yeon was writing to him, asking if he had time, because she needed to give him something. After reading it, Jin-hyuk smiled contentedly and asked himself, was it really this to give him something? Ji-yeon smiled, asking the guy to come in. Taking off his shoes, Jin-hyuk said that he hadn't been in such a small house for a long time, after which the girl asked how he was, because she thought that he would be useful in the future, so she tried to make it comfortable. After looking around, the guy replied that it turned out beautifully, and she tried her best. Tucking her hair behind her ear, Ji-yeon asked if he noticed anything about her, not the house. Jin-hyuk's face suddenly changed. Noticing the cross behind the girl, he realized that she had changed her profession. Putting her palms together, Ji-yeon replied that she had become a crusader, after which the guy smiled, asking how so, because he thought that she was also aiming for the hidden class this time. Lowering her head, the girl replied that it was too annoying and time-consuming, and also her profession was similar to what she did before. Putting a hand to her chin, Jin-hyuk thought, logically, that she liked the hybrid profession with elements of a damage dealer and a support. Moving his chair back, Ji-yeon noticed that the guy mentioned a hidden class. Handing him the letter, the girl said that the director sent this request to change the profession to a hidden one. Smiling, the protagonist thought that he knew it, that's what she needed to tell him. Imagining himself in equipment, he thought that he could finally become part of the hidden class again, a master of weapons. Putting her hands on the table, Ji-yeon said that this thing is given to those who are in the top 10 rankers during the Herodin raid, when suddenly Jin-hyuk asked what this time. The girl handed over the package, answering that they said that they will allow you to choose this status during the second shift of work. This is a mercenary contract. In the abyss you can summon an animal, or a familiar spirit, but in the world of the abyss there is an opportunity to receive a request for a favor from an NPC, and if everything is fine with them, they can take him as a hired worker. Then this contract will come in handy, but now this thing is useless, and it also works if you summon monsters, but not bosses. Opening the ticket to summon a pet, the girl shouted that the time has come. Surprise appeared on Jin-hyuk's face. Putting his head on his hand, the guy said that they are often summoned now, but they are not able to help win. Ji-yeon jumped up from her chair, shouting, "Right." She smiled and said that she was calling. The nightlight shadow witch, the moon, suddenly appeared in front of them. The protagonist opened his mouth when he saw the unique status. Frowning, he asked if she had planned all this with the guy, when suddenly the girl slammed the table, shouting that she was completely innocent, and it was all just luck. Jin-hyuk extended his hand forward and asked to give it to him to try. He grinned and said that he would tear it right away. The sheet began to tear into two pieces. A magic seal appeared in front of them, and Ji-yeon was surprised, shouting that it was bold. A bright beam burst upward, blinding the guys. Covering her face with her hands, Ji-yeon menacingly asked what he was doing. After some time, the flame disappeared. Opening one eye, the protagonist asked if it was over. Pumpkin appeared on the table in front of them. She spread her arms out to the sides and smiled. The girl opened her mouth wide, shouting that this couldn't be. The protagonist looked at Pumpkin, asking if it was a hidden pet. Ji-yeon raised her hand to her mouth in shock and screamed that she couldn't believe it, then asked how he got a hidden pet the first time. The great fire mage Pumpkin waved her arms in different directions. Her level was hidden, and her appearance was spirit. Tears welled up in the girl's eyes and she screamed, asking if he had colluded with the director, to which the guy, putting his hands on his hips, replied that she herself saw that it was just luck. Pitifully knitting her brows, she asked if he told her that he always pumped up his agility, to which he replied yes, and what? Then the girl looked at Pumpkin, who stuck out her index finger and explained that her passive skill, linked stats, worked like a system that shared stats with its owner, then asked what his agility value was. Hearing this, the guy stood up, put his hand to his chin and thoughtfully answered about 180. Hearing this, Ji-yeon raised her eyebrows in shock, because she added 180 units to her magical attack. When suddenly she knocked over a chair and screamed that his assistant's attack power was at least 200. Then she raised her hands and said sadly that this really irritated her. Why did he always get all the cool stuff? And the main character smiled and exclaimed that this was 3 times more than his attack power, and now he could rely on his pet's help. When the pumpkin flew up to him, a notification appeared in front of him, asking if he would make a contract with the great fire mage Pumpkin. Without thinking twice, the guy extended his hand and firmly answered yes. After these words, he pressed the button yes. Immediately after that, a wide green system screen appeared above the guys. Jin-hyuk frowned in confusion at what he saw and said that it put him in a dubious position, because everyone in the world was informed that a hidden tier pet had appeared and that player Sid had made a contract with it. Remembering this notification, the protagonist sat at the table with his arms folded and said to himself that this was another notification to the world. Just like when they cleared the first hidden dungeon, it was done to attract attention. But for now he was not that strong and he wanted to live inconspicuously. While he was thinking about this, a notification appeared next to him about a message in which Hannah asked him if he really got a hidden pet. The guy opened the message and said to himself that he ignored her because she kept writing about joining her guild. Ji-yeon sat opposite him and asked who was writing to him, to which he replied, an acquaintance. When his partner asked if it was really Hannah, he looked up at her in shock. The guy frowned and asked her how she knew if Pong had told her, to which she replied that he had shown up on her stream yesterday. She flicked her finger to open the system screen and told her that a video of him had filled the game chats. After saying this, she showed a video called Hunter Destroys Black Knight in Hidden Dungeon. Seeing this, the protagonist raised his hand to his chin and told her that it was a video of the fight with the Black Knight yesterday, and then asked what was so special about it that it had appeared like that, to which his partner screamed, asking if he was seriously asking why. Furrowing her brows, she raised her hand and screamed, asking if he really thought anyone could win. Then Jin-hyuk folded his arms and calmly replied, of course, since the victory was the result of a prediction, as well as avoiding them, adding that he intentionally made it look too easy to win so as not to make a fuss. Hearing this, Ji-yeon clenched his fists and shouted that this was very annoying, since no one could do this, only he could do it. At this rate his identity would quickly be revealed, and then ordered him to look at the comments. The protagonist saw that in the comments, people wrote that he was definitely a top ranker, and it seemed that he was among the top 10, and among these 10, only one was so good at archery. Suddenly, shock appeared in his eyes, because he saw that people had narrowed the search down to his old nickname, and he wondered if they really did this just based on one small fact. Suddenly, Jin-hyuk saw a comment from a person who wrote that there was a way to check this. Below people asked how to do this, to which the commenter replied that Hannah invited him to the Limitless Guild. If he declines the invitation, it is Kwon-sil. If he joins, it is not him. After reading this, the protagonist smiled and said to himself that these were quite interesting conclusions. Ji-yeon calmed down and said that he should take this chance to join Limitless. Raising his hand, Jin-hyuk shouted in shock, asking what she was talking about. Ji-yeon extended his hand and explained that instead of living in constant fear of being found out, he should join the guild under a new name, and he could always leave later. Putting his hand to his chin, the protagonist thought that it was true. If he stayed in the guild for more than a month, he could leave at any time. Smiling, the girl told him to think about it seriously, and then asked if he would want to continue playing after his identity was found out. Lost in thought, Jin-hyuk thought that even thinking about it was scary. Hannah suddenly sent him a message, saying that she would not write anymore, but asked if they could meet at least once, while the protagonist wordlessly stared at the screen. His finger suddenly reached for the system window. Winking, Hannah greeted her subscribers and new viewers. In the chat, she was asked when the Almighty would come, to which the girl clenched her hand into a fist, asking to wait a little, after which a question was heard behind her whether she was streaming. The girl turned back with a smile. Jin-hyuk stood in front of her, folding his arms across his chest. Running up to him, Hannah congratulated him on getting a hidden pet. Smiling, she added that tickets for summoning pets had not been issued for a long time, after which she asked how much time he spent to knock out the hidden one. Without taking his eyes off her, the main character coldly answered, not at all, he just took advantage of what he got from the event. The streamer's face changed, loudly screaming that he was lying, and asked to show them the pet. The guy smiled, and the great fire mage pumpkin appeared next to him. Having lowered herself, the girl called him a cutie. Looking at the pet, Hannah asked if it had high attack power, because with such a cutie, the guy no longer needed anyone in the dungeons. Yawning, Jin-hyuk replied that he could do without a pet, but at least now he could relax, while in the chat they wrote that they agreed with him, because he was omnipotent. Looking at the girl, the protagonist remembered yesterday's proposal, when suddenly Hannah began to listen to him attentively. Putting his hand on his hip, Jin-hyuk said that he joined the Limitless Guild, which greatly shocked the viewers. Smiling, the girl asked if it was true. Looking at her, the guy asked if he could meet their guild master. She was popular, but he had never communicated with her in person, so he was interested in how strong she was. Clenching her hands into fists, Hannah asked if they had not met in the abyss. Closing his eyes, the protagonist answered, never, thinking that this was not entirely true. Jin-hyuk thought back to his memories, not fighting Han-sung that much, and not seeing Hannah that often. Scratching his cheek, he said that he hadn't been to the abyss that often, as he was more focused on another game, when the streamer asked what game it was. Jin-hyuk replied that it was Red Soul, thinking that it was a VR action game similar to the abyss, known for its difficult boss fights, and losing to them results in being erased from the world. Han had a confused smile on his face, while the chat was saying that the guy wasn't Korn. Jin-hyuk smiled, thinking that the public's opinion was changing, and by joining Limitless, he would remove all suspicion from himself. Opening the system window, Hannah said that she would go to Hanan to arrange a meeting with the guy, when he suddenly turned around, asking to let her know when the meeting date was set. Watching the main character, the streamer asked if he was leaving already, after which Jin-hyuk raised his hand, answering that he had things to do. The viewers began to ask him not to leave, when suddenly the girl asked if he could stay here a little longer, and what he needed to do. Picking up a mysterious letter sealed in blood, the main character answered, to change his first job. After some time, the main character came to the estate of Count Rose. Holding the letter in his hands, he said that if this is their castle, then Nerja, whose letter he received, belongs to this family. Approaching the entrance, he saw 2 knights and said to himself that the security was quite tight. However, such measures are quite understandable, considering that the only heiress was recently kidnapped. Before he had time to get closer, the guards moved their axes. One of them frowned and ordered to say the purpose of visiting the estate, because no one is allowed to enter without permission. The boy showed the letter and explained that he came to deliver it. The guard leaned closer and asked who it was addressed to which he replied, the head butler, Ale. Hearing this, the man extended his hand towards the letter, saying that they would give it to him themselves. Jin-hyuk then pulled his hand back and said that he couldn't let them do that, since he needed to deliver it to him personally. After saying this, he remembered how he had been in a terrible situation before, when a middleman received rewards for him, since the delivery quest would not be counted if the recipient accepted a third party's letter. The guard looked at the boy and menacingly replied that he couldn't allow a stranger to enter. Hearing this, Jin-hyuk closed his eyes and said to himself that the guards were just doing their job, then calmly explained that he was here to see Nerja. As soon as the guards heard this, they raised their eyebrows in shock, then shouted, asking how he knew the young mistress' name. The guy put his hand on his hip and answered with a smile that if they said that her savior from the dungeon had come, she would immediately understand who he was. A few minutes later, he was led down the corridor, and he said to himself that, as expected, everything would become much easier if you just said the name of a person of higher status. There was a knock on the lady's door. Then 2 guards opened the doors. The protagonist raised his eyebrows in shock at what he saw. Nerja was in the room in a long white dress. Seeing the savior, she smiled happily. Bowing, she said that yesterday she did not have the opportunity to thank him properly, but she was very grateful that he saved her. Raising her head to the guest, she asked why he came. Then Jin-hyuk showed the letter and asked if she could arrange a meeting with the butler Ale for him, because he needed to give him something. After a while, the man entered the room. It was the head butler of Rosal County. He approached the lady and said that he heard that someone had come for him. Then the protagonist handed him a letter. The butler immediately opened it. Suddenly, sadness appeared in his eyes, and he quietly said that everything was clear, after which he thanked the guy for delivering a letter from his old friend Hazard. Raising his eyebrows, Jin-hyuk asked if he had just said the name Hazard. Remembering the image of his friend, the butler said that Hazard was a weapon expert of the Southern Desert Clan, a hero who fought tirelessly against the Red Queen, and for him, he was a comrade in battle during the times when they fought in the same mercenary group. Pursing his lip, the protagonist thought that it was about the NPC weaponsmith Hazard of the Abyss. He was the most interesting and impressive of all the opponents, and apparently he died on the way to the world of the Abyss. Putting the letter away, the old man said he had a question. Adjusting his monocle, Al asked if the boy had brought him this letter, meaning he was ready to take on Hazard's will and carry it out. Frowning, the protagonist confidently answered yes, and the butler said he would check whether the boy was capable of it or not. He began to explain that there was a stone hall in the cemetery of the northern garden of the manor. The old man knew that the remains of the monsters of the past abyss were inside it, so he told the boy this. Seeing Jin-hyuk out, Al said that they needed to destroy all the monsters in the stone hall within 3 hours, and if they failed, there would be no second chance. Closing the door, the butler wished him luck. Going down the stairs, the protagonist allowed Pumpkin to leave. Putting his hand on his hip, Jin-hyuk realized that he did not have special torches. Putting his hands in his pockets, they walked along the dark street. Suddenly, a huge tentacle stretched out from the protagonist's head. Having managed to react, the guy dodged. Squinting, he turned his gaze. In front of him on the ground, he saw slimes that he would have to eliminate. Gritting his teeth, the protagonist thought that these were the most vile monsters, never leaving his top anti-favorites. Their immunity to physical attacks is 50% and there are no weak points, and they greatly affect the durability of weapons. Tightly gripping the dagger, the guy thought that they also corrode matter. Their endurance is 3 to 4 times greater than that of an ordinary slime, so he wondered when he would have time to defeat them all. Suddenly, he looked down at Pumpkin. The pet was pointing at itself. Smiling, Jin-hyuk thought that given that only one person can participate, no one said that you can't use the help of a pet. A fiery blow flew at the slime. The monsters roared loudly in pain. The protagonist watched from the sidelines with his hands in his pockets. Turning around, he thought with a smile that it was a weight off his shoulders. Lost in his memories, Jin-hyuk remembered breaking many weapons in the abyss trying to catch slimes. The system reported that they defeated the monsters, after which the protagonist walked forward, saying that they quickly dealt with everyone. Turning around, Pumpkin began waving his arms happily. Jin-hyuk patted his pet on the head, thinking that they defeated 30 monsters in total. Looking at the door, he thought that only the boss remained. The protagonist destroyed all the monsters and opened the doors to the boss room. Inside, there was a magical seal on the floor. The guy looked down and asked himself what this place was for, adding that it was so different from what he had before. Suddenly, a man stepped towards him and asked who could have known that this extremely powerful spirit would be with him. The protagonist's eyes widened in shock at what he saw and he screamed, asking why he was here. Butler Ein pulled on his gloves and said menacingly that he needed to fight him one-on-one for the final test. Jin-hyuk spread his arms and asked himself why he was here. Didn't he say that the remains of the abyss were sealed here? Then the butler pointed behind him and said that only the entrance to the chamber was sealed and the back door was wide open. He then walked up to the table and said, "The path of Hazard is the path of a person who can freely wield any weapon." He pointed his hand towards the shelves and asked the guest to use the weapons here and defeat him. The protagonist picked up a sword and said to himself that there were 5 types of weapons here: a long sword, a spear, a bow, an axe, and a throwing weapon. This means that he must know how to wield various weapons. There is nothing special about it, but he saw cracks on his sword and finished, "The durability of the weapon is very poor." The butler noticed this in the guy's gaze and said with a smile on his face, "That's right, their durability is set at 1%. Hearing this, Jin-hyuk twirled the kunai on his finger and said to himself, "There are only 12 weapons. Their durability is such that they will break after one use." In other words, he was given 12 chances. With these thoughts, he tightly gripped the kunai in his hands and added, "He needs to defeat him in 12 attacks." Looking at the butler out of the corner of his eye, the protagonist asked if the conditions were too strict, to which the butler, spreading his arms out to the sides, replied that it was only natural. Not everyone can go the way of the weapon master. Extending his hand forward, he added that he would allow him to attack first, so he could do it whenever he was ready. Jin-hyuk extended his hand with the kunai and asked if he was absolutely sure that he could use this throwing knife, to which the butler asked what he meant. The boy stepped towards him, saying that it seemed pretty durable compared to the others, so would anything bad happen to him if he used it since it was one of the weapons here, to which Ein said in surprise that it was impossible and he wanted to check. When suddenly the protagonist grabbed him by the chest. Smiling slyly, he swung his weapon and said that the butler allowed him to attack first, so he was going to do just that. After saying that, the boy delivered a powerful blow. After that, his weapon broke. The kunai pierced the target. The throwing knife was originally designed to be thrown, but compared to arrows, it is slower and easier to parry. However, there is no rule that throwing weapons must be thrown. Even Ein probably couldn't imagine that he would use a throwing weapon to stab him. The butler grabbed the wound on his neck and shouted that his opponent was very angry. At this time, Jin-hyuk grabbed the spear and asked if he had asked him to give up the first attack. The butler grabbed his sword and said to himself that his opponent was holding a spear, and a spear certainly had an advantage over a sword because it was long. With these thoughts, he took off, adding that it was difficult to attack with a spear when the opponent was very close. But suddenly, an axe appeared in front of his face. Ale fell to the ground with a loud cry. Starting to tremble, the old man shouted that he was sure the boy had a spear in his hand just now, and then asked when he changed it to an axe. Reaching behind his back, Jin-hyuk replied that the more often he changed weapons, the faster he could do it. Taking out his bow, he pointed it at the butler. Taking a stance, Ale thought that he needed to attack the boy while he was running, so that he would not be able to shoot an arrow. Gritting his teeth, he wondered what if Jin-hyuk changed his weapon again like before. Smirking, the protagonist said that the old man thinks a lot, but he does not plan on changing his weapon. At that moment, an arrow flew into the butler's shoulder. The guy quickly appeared right in front of his face. Frowning, he grabbed the handles of the spear with both hands. Starting to dash forward, Jin-hyuk tried to attack his opponent. I'll grab the arrow, thinking that this was bad, because he was completely carried away by this moment. Taking a step back, he thought that he needed to step back and think. The protagonist's hand suddenly reached for another weapon. Grabbing the spear, he abruptly hit the butler with it. Kneeling down, Al tried to catch his breath. Jin-hyuk's eyes widened, wondering if his opponent was still holding on after all this. Taking 2 swords, he realized that this was all that was left, so he needed to finish with 2 attacks. Al dashed forward, thinking that the opponent only had 2 swords, so there would be no more tricks. Looking at the straight-up guy, the old man thought that he was fast. Putting his sword forward, the protagonists began to block the attack. Swinging, the guy hit the opponent's weapon hard, who thought that the guy's attacks were very strong. Having received a wound in the side, the butler gritted his teeth in pain. Looking at the fragments of the sword, Jin-hyuk realized that it was destroyed. Al smiled, saying that the protagonist used up all his weapons, and if he made another attack, it would be successful. Jin-hyuk looked at the bracelet on his hand, saying that everything was perfect. A bright lightning immediately appeared in the sky, while the old man looked at the guy in bewilderment. Lightning suddenly engulfed his body, causing him to scream in pain. The sword fell to the ground with a ringing blow. Kneeling down, Al said that he admitted his defeat. He lowered his head and said that the protagonist was suitable to become Hazard's successor. Jin-hyuk smiled and wondered if he could finally change his class to the Weapon Master class he wanted so much. The butler handed Hazard's notes to the protagonist and said that this was his reward for passing the test. The guy opened the book and received a task to change the Weapon Expert class, in which he had to complete 3 tests, after which he would receive the Weapon Expert class as a reward. Jin-hyuk let out a heavy sigh and wondered if this was another class transfer quest, adding that not only that, this was the first step to becoming a weapon expert. After all, this was just a step towards becoming a weapon master, so it would take time to become a weapon master. After thinking about this, the first trial appeared in front of him, which required him to kill 1,000 monsters with each weapon. Then the second trial appeared, which required him to engage in combat with an NPC who had exceeded level 35 and win 5 times in a row, and then engage in combat with a player who had reached level 40 and win 5 times in a row. Finally, the third trial appeared, which required him to clear the Mirror Tower dungeon, which the protagonist had never even heard of and didn't know where it was. After reading everything he needed to, Jin-hyuk closed the book and said to himself that since he didn't have a weapon for the first trial, he might as well take the trial he could take right now. Coming out of the dungeon, he stopped in surprise. In front of him, he saw Nerja, who was holding onto his dress and asking how his test went. The protagonist calmly replied that he passed it, causing the girl to clench her fists and exclaim that it was amazing, adding that considering it was a test befitting the hero's successor, it must have been difficult. Suddenly, the smile disappeared from her face, and she quietly said that she actually wanted to ask for a favor. With a pitiful frown, she folded her hands and added that she could not ask anyone else for help in this matter, after which she asked if the guy could listen to her request. Jin-hyuk exhaled heavily and wondered why he had a feeling that annoying quests would line up. The mansion was quite bright. The head of the Rose clan was sitting in his office, with folded hands, asking if he remembered correctly that the protagonist's name was Sid. Jin-hyuk bowed and answered yes, after which the man thanked him for saving his daughter, because Nerja was his only beloved child. The girl put her hand to her chest and said that he dealt with Talon and Uncle, and then saved her. Moreover, he won the Hazard trial. Smiling widely, she added that the guy was ready to return their family's treasure, the light sphere. Hearing this, the protagonist looked at Narsha in surprise and asked himself, the light sphere. The head of the Rose family put his hand to his chin and said that he still did not really trust him, because in the place where the legendary knight died, a simple butler's trial seemed insufficient qualification for survival. Hearing this, the girl raised her hands and screamed, and her father immediately asked her to pull herself together. Stretching out his hand, he explained that he intended to test Jin-hyuk to ensure the righteousness of his valor, after which a notification appeared in front of the guy saying that he had received a mocking quest, the trial of Count Rose, in which he needed to win a fight against 3 knights of his family at the same time. After reading the quest, the protagonist made a face and said to himself that it was an annoying quest as he thought, and then thought that he should give up on it and start the class transfer quest, when he suddenly read the description and details of the quest. Surprise appeared in his eyes as he thought of something, and then told the Count that he thought that 3 knights might not be enough to prove his competence. Hearing this, Narsha and her father looked at him in shock. Jin-hyuk put his hand on his hip and asked without a trace of hesitation in his voice to expand the group to 5 knights who had reached level 35, while saying in his head that this also agreed with completing the second task of the class transfer quest. The man then smiled widely and exclaimed that this was very good and he agreed, and then asked for permission to testify whether he was smart enough to underestimate the prowess of the Rose family knights. After a while, 5 knights entered the arena. The protagonist was stretching his joints, and behind him stood Nerja, who excitedly asked why he said that, since fighting 3 of them was already hard enough, to which he replied that everything was fine, since it was easier than she thought. Suddenly, the butler approached them from behind and said that he had brought a sword for a test. Holding out a wooden sword, he added that he ardently wished him victory, as the heir of Hazard, of course. The guy took the sword in his hands and firmly said that he would win this duel. The guy confidently walked into the arena. Standing above, Neff said that he had gathered 5 respected knights. Folding his arms across his chest, he shouted that if all preparations were complete, we could begin. The protagonist turned to the knight, who said that they would do as their lord commanded, but they were knights of honor. Raising his palm, he said that he knew that this was an unfair fight, so they would give Jin-hyuk 5 tries. The guy grinned, thinking that his opponent would regret it. The leader raised his hand up, shouting, "Let the fight begin." The protagonist suddenly moved. Making a dash forward, he knocked his opponent to the ground. Swinging, the guy mentally began to count, when suddenly the knight asked him to wait. The second knight menacingly ran at the guy, asking what he was doing. Approaching, he swung his sword hard. Jin-hyuk turned his head to him, saying that there was one more try left, and asked him not to say that the knight was going to break his promise. The guy immediately snatched the sword from his hands. Smiling, he said that's why he shouldn't let his guard down. Swinging, Jin-hyuk suddenly threw it away. Smiling, the protagonist said that there was the 5th and last one left. He immediately hit the knight with all his might on the neck with his sword. Looking at the lying body, the guy said that at the moment 2 were already out. The angry opponent swung, quickly rushing to attack him. Jin-hyuk turned around and blocked the blows. Suddenly, he struck one of the enemies in the stomach. Turning to the second one, their swords clashed. At that moment, his entire body was completely enveloped in lightning. Turning back, the knight frowned in confusion. Having missed the blow, the protagonist hit him with all his might, throwing off his helmet. Putting his hand on his hip, Jin-hyuk looked at the bodies lying in front of him. He looked up at Neff, asking if this was okay with him. The leader's expression changed, asking for forgiveness for not being able to recognize the hero. A letter of appointment as a knight of honor suddenly appeared in the protagonist's hand. Without taking his eyes off the guy, Neff said that with his skills, knighting right now might seem inappropriate, but only after certain achievements would he be able to receive the appointment, so he would tell the guy about it first. Putting his hand on his chest, the leader asked him to return the treasure to their family, when suddenly Jin-hyuk received a hidden quest again. His eyes widened and he was very surprised when he read about the fortress of the Ash Hunter. The protagonist immediately realized that it was Haradrim, and then wondered if he would really fight the monster that he logged in as. The protagonist opened his mouth in shock and wondered if the dungeon that Haradrim appeared in, did that mean he would fight an AI that was based on his combat skills, and then a notification about a hidden quest appeared in front of him, in which he needed to retrieve the family treasure, the Sphere of Light, from the depths of the fortress. While the guy was wondering what Haradrim's AI looked like, adding that he also liked the idea of the hidden item box being the reward. However, he thought that the class change quest was in first place now, but it would take some time, and he would do it later. A message appeared in front of him. Opening the system screen in front of him, Jin-hyuk responded to Ji-yeon asking him if he was busy right now and didn't want to go dungeon with her, to which he replied that he was indeed busy this time. But when the girl asked him if he needed a new weapon since he had used many weapons in the abyss, he furrowed his brows in thought. Recalling how he had blocked a bow in the dungeon and it had broken, the protagonist said to himself that now that he thought about it, he was using old weapons. Since his bow had broken, he had even needed 5 different weapons for the class transfer quest, and collecting weapons was the most urgent task for him. While he was thinking about this, Ji-yeon asked him if he was interested in weapons sold in black markets, to which the protagonist opened his mouth in shock and asked himself, black market. There were people walking along the streets of the well-lit city. Jin-hyuk stood against the wall with his arms folded and wondered if she was late after calling him all the way here, adding that his time was very valuable. However, he needed a weapon so he would have to wait a little while, and for now, he should open the treasure chests. Thinking about it, he waved his finger and took out 3 mysterious treasure chests from his inventory. Without thinking twice, he opened them. At the same time, magical marks began to appear on his left hand, after which he was informed that the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th stigmata, a hidden rarity, had been improved. After reading all the information, Jin-hyuk clenched his hand into a fist and said to himself that with an additional 100% critical damage for each mark, his critical damage should now be 400%, and if he simply increased his critical rate, his attack power would be insane, and he was now looking forward to the desired effect when he received the final stigmata. While he was doing this, Ji-yeon came up to him from the side, waved her hand and said that she was here. The protagonist turned to her with a displeased expression and asked why she was so late and if she knew how long he had been waiting, to which she closed her eyes, apologized and said that it was too early, so he would have to wait a little longer. According to her, the black market merchant appears between 6 and 7 o'clock in the evening for half an hour, and at that moment, the man in the black cloak was looking around. Suddenly, he saw the protagonist and his partner walking towards him. There are 2 unusual things about black market merchants. One of them is that you can only buy 1 item per person. The man laid out the available weapons on the ground. The other problem is that all the items cannot be assessed, so you can't see their properties. Jin-hyuk leaned over and said that he had no idea what was good and he didn't want to waste money, to which his partner put her hands in her pocket and said that she shouldn't worry about it. A second later, she pulled out 2 weapon coupons and said that the boss gave them to her because she helped with the task. Without thinking, the guy reached for the sword. Picking up the weapon, he said that he would take this sword. After finishing the bidding, the girl said in surprise that she thought he would take the bow, to which he threw the sword over his shoulder and said that he was already sick of bows. After that, Ji-yeon used the appraisal scroll. After a short pause, she turned to her friend with a big smile on her face and exclaimed that she had a rare class Belova, and then asked what he had received. Jin-hyuk extended his hand towards her and asked her to give him an appraisal scroll. When he used it, he saw that he had received a unique quality Berserker merch, which allowed him to use an additional skill when the owner's remaining HP reached 50%. After reading this, the guy smiled contentedly, saying that he was lucky, and his friend, raising her hands, exclaimed that she did not understand how this always happens, adding that the same thing happened with the pet that time. Why is he so lucky? Suddenly, a message notification appeared in front of Jin-hyuk. Opening the system screen, he said that Hannah was writing to him and asking him to come for an interview. Hearing this, Ji-yeon clenched her fists and shouted, asking if he was finally joining the guild, adding that with his skills, it was impossible not to pass. Hearing this, the boy slammed his sword into the ground and said to himself that it was true, he just needed to pass and get rid of the suspicion that he was not Korn's Sill at all costs. There were few people in the square. Walking along the street, the protagonist heard someone call out to him. Raising her hand up, Hannah shouted that she was here. The girl behind her stepped forward. Extending her hand forward, Hannah introduced herself as the guild master of the Limitless Guild. Extending her hand in return, Jin-hyuk said that he was also glad to meet her. Smiling, the girl said that she had heard a lot about him from Han, and she said that he was extremely agile. Without taking her eyes off the boy, the guild master said that she heard that Jin-hyuk was a ranker in the abyss, and then asked what his character's name was back then. Closing his eyes, the protagonist replied that she wouldn't know even if he told her, since he hadn't even made it to the top 300, thinking that he would just cover it up with a lie. Smiling, Hannah asked if he had seen the video that Hannah posted, where there was a comment that had the most likes, saying that if the protagonist was good, he would be in the top 10 in the abyss. Nodding, she added that she agreed with that statement. The girl began to remember how her average rank for the abyss was 11th, so she knew how good the top 10 players were. Among them, only 2 people used a bow. One of them was Russian Roulette, who had chosen shooting as an occupation from the beginning. Without removing her smile, Hannah added that the second one was Korn Silk, a rank 1. His bow skills were on par with archers, but he chose the warrior class instead. Looking ahead from under her brows, the guild master said, just like Jin-hyuk. Squinting, the protagonist thought that the girl still suspected him. Perhaps because he had faced her face to face so many times in the abyss, she had good intuition. Putting her hand on her chin, Hannah said that according to the guy, he played Red Soul more, to which Jin-hyuk nodded, answering that it was funny for Hannah to compare him to the number 1 player, when suddenly the guild master asked if he could tell the name of his character in the abyss. Rubbing his cheek in embarrassment, the protagonist replied that it was a little difficult because he was a little short of money, so he sold his account. Hannah frowned in surprise. Jin-hyuk closed his eyes and said that he knew it was illegal but he had no choice but to do it to pay for his training, then thought that Hannah hated the idea of buying and selling accounts and items. Besides, it was impolite to divulge the information of the account that was sold, so this was a good excuse. Hannah folded her arms and replied that she understood so she wouldn't ask any more questions, thinking that no matter how she looked at it, the guy did look like Korn Silk but she didn't have enough concrete evidence. But that was fine, so the actual fight would show her whether he was Korn Silk or not. There were guys standing in the Limitless Guild's training ground and someone said that it was time to move on to the selection. Hannah looked ahead and said that they would be fighting a total of 3 guild members in order. Each round would last 10 minutes. Potions and healing magic were prohibited, while the 3 guys listened to her attentively. The protagonist stretched his wrist and chuckled. The girl looked at him, asking if he was releasing his tension, to which Jin-hyuk turned to her, saying that the bracelet would only hinder him, so he took it off, thinking that in a long game without recovery, even if he hit them multiple times, if he was hit once, he would lose. Hannah narrowed her eyes, wondering what kind of ability it had to be a hindrance. Grabbing the hilt of his sword, the protagonist said that he wanted to change the rules, and wanted to fight not 3, but 5 people. Hannah's eyes widened in surprise. Putting her hand on her hip, she said that this was an entrance test, so he couldn't just change the rules, to which the guy smiled, saying that he didn't think he could fully display his skills with just 3. Pointing his sword at the two guys, he said that he would choose them. The members gritted their teeth, asking if he was overconfident, so they would see if Jin Hyuk was really that good. A smile appeared on the protagonist's face, when suddenly Henyoung stretched out her hands, scared that he had chosen the guild leaders. Baekwi, whose overall rating is 128, and his PvP rating is 106, pulled out his sword from its sheath. He wields a cutlass as his main weapon, a dagger specialized for naval combat, which sets him apart from the preferences of other swordsmen. However, he continues to use the cutlass. This tenacity paid off when he managed to defeat Henyoung with it, whether through luck or skill. He had a mad smile on his face. Few opponents are familiar with the cutlass battle, which also led to Henyoung's downfall. Baekwi's victory over Henyoung paved the way for him to become the head manager, and he even challenged Hanseong with this success. However, this challenge resulted in a humiliating defeat. His natural talent, which surpassed even Henyoung's, allows him to instantly assess and counter unfamiliar sword skills. Hanseong's eyes were blazing, and everyone considered him a monster. The protagonist had his hand on the hilt of his sword. Baekwi stood in front of him, and it was announced that each round was limited to 10 minutes. The duel would continue until one side gave in or was knocked out, and potions and healing magic were prohibited. Baekwi looked at the guy and said to himself that he recognized him. After all, he appeared on that stream. His archery skills were commendable, and his combat sense was top-notch. A wide smile suddenly appeared on his face, and he added that these traits were mainly suitable for fighting monsters, and real battles did not have predictable patterns like dungeons. He noticed Jin Hyuk's huge sword and wondered if he was using a great sword instead of his signature bow, how an archer could excel at wielding a sword. As he was thinking about this, Henyoung extended his hand and shouted that they were sparring. Baekwi immediately took off. He made a quick attack, saying to himself that the odds seemed to be in his favor. But less than a minute later, he gritted his teeth, continuing to attack. The protagonist blocked every one of his attacks. With his other hand on the blade, he quickly controlled the sword. Baekwi's hand shook from the strain, and he wondered if he was blocking the attacks by tilting his sword, if he knew how to defend himself with the sword. While he was thinking about this, Jin Hyuk raised a huge sword behind his back. But his opponent blocked the attack, saying to himself that his attacks lacked finesse. As he suspected, he was not experienced in PvP. With these thoughts, Baekwi lunged, saying to himself that he had a chance. But suddenly he saw a broadsword flying at him. The guy did not have time to block the attack and flew back. Falling to the floor, he said to himself that he clearly initiated the attack, but why then was his opponent faster? Because a two-handed sword gives priority to strength over speed, and his attack could not outpace him. The protagonist pointed the sword at his opponent. Shock appeared in Baekwi's eyes, and he screamed, asking if he really put everything into agility. Then the protagonist smiled and replied that it was so. The boy remembered Hansen with a pitiful frown and said that he had done exactly the same as him, but that couldn't be true, that was impossible. At that very moment, he rushed to attack again. The protagonist raised his sword to repel the attack. But suddenly, Baekwi's sword cut his shoulder. Seeing this, the boy opened his mouth in shock and wondered if he had really hit him. After making several quick attacks, he hit him again and realized that at this rate, victory would be his. But suddenly, cold sweat began to appear on his face, and he wondered why he had such a bad feeling. His attack hit Jin Hyuk again, injuring his face. Suddenly, the protagonist smiled slyly, because now he had 50% of his health left, after which he activated Rampage. His eyes lit up, and the outline of the first owner of the sword appeared behind him. The Rampage skill awakens the berserker spirit in his great sword, entering a 60-second state, increasing his physical and magical damage, attack and movement speed, and critical hit chance. Seeing the huge sword above him, Baekwi froze in fear. A powerful explosion was heard from the collision. Less than a minute later, the smoke began to clear. Enveloped in an incredibly powerful aura, Jin Hyuk stood over the defeated enemy and said to himself that with 200% physical damage and 400% critical damage, the defense is almost destroyed after use, but he dodges to avoid being hit. Thinking about this, he threw the sword over his shoulder. The audience in the room opened their mouths in shock, shouting that Baekwi had lost consciousness from a single blow, and then asked what kind of power this was. The protagonist was suddenly enveloped in an aura of healing. Coming to her senses, Hanan reported that after each round, his HP was restored to normal. Suddenly, a man entered the arena and said that he seemed to wield this two-handed sword with noticeable skill. It was Lancelot, who had rank 36 in PvP, holding a spear in his hands and saying that it was a coincidence that he was also an item user, so he wanted to let their personal arsenal of items decide the outcome. Jin Hyuk stood up and said to himself that this was a familiar face, one of the outstanding spearmen. They often clashed during guild wars in the Abyss. He recalled how fiercely they fought, adding that having missed the 1 versus 100 tournament, he never expected to meet him here, adding that being familiar with his fighting style might give him an advantage, but to avoid suspicion, he would make sure to keep the outcome uncertain. While thinking about this, he glanced out of the corner of his eye at Hanan, who was staring at him. In the midst of the fight, a spear pierced his clothes. The protagonist's massive sword reached his opponent's armor. Those present in the hall stared at the fierce fight, shouting that it was amazing how he was facing a player like Lancelot. The girl, with her brows drawn together, asked what the purpose of the entrance test was if he was competing with the top brass, to which the boy in front of her, his face pale, asked if they were currently undergoing tests. A few minutes later, Lancelot knelt down. He breathed heavily and said that he gave up because it was too much, and the protagonist turned around and said for the next one to go. Jeju walked up to Henyang and asked if they should continue since they could with his experience. But before she could finish speaking, Jin Hyuk raised his hand and firmly replied, no, he would take the entrance test as planned since this was not a friendly duel. Changing was inappropriate. Hearing this, the 3 of them turned pale with fear, realizing that they were finished. After a while, the 3 of them were lying on the floor. The protagonist, seeing that the second condition of the class change quest had been completed, smiled contentedly and said to himself that the class change quest was going smoothly. After that, he turned to Henyang and asked what the verdict was. The girl smiled in confusion and asked herself why he would even ask such obvious things, and then welcomed him to the Limitless Guild.